Calm observers, I am Maggie Liu. The game system we are breaking down today has a starting setup entirely different from the previous ones. This is a dual rebirth exit game. Both the male and female leads return to the starting point with their complete memories from their past lives. But their objective functions are totally opposite. Xiaoxun wants to fix his regrets and make up for all the status and affection he failed to give Guayu in their past life. Gu Huaining only has one thing to do: disappear completely from his life script. I've seen my sister's smiles, frowns, and playful anger towards the Crown Prince. I've seen the usually bright and noble Crown Prince lower himself just to coax my sister, looking so doting yet helpless. But as luck would have it, at the flower viewing banquet, the Crown Prince mistook me for my sister when I fell into the lake and pulled me ashore. The Empress immediately asked the Emperor to grant us a marriage. Out of spite, my sister then casually agreed to a marriage proposal. From then on, the lovers could no longer be together. I could only do my duty as the Crown Princess and stand by the Crown Prince through thick and thin. After becoming the Empress, I managed the harem and balanced internal and external affairs. I was kind to the concubines who looked exactly like my sister. Right up until my deathbed, he stood by my bed and said I had worked hard all these years. Opening my eyes again, I actually went back to the moment I was pushed into the water. I thrashed around in the water only to see the Crown Prince Xiaoxun standing on the shore. He just gave me a cold glance and turned away. I knew it, he came back too. And in this life, everything will finally get back on track. The flower viewing banquet hosted by the Empress was actually meant to scout out a Crown Princess for the Crown Prince. Every noble lady in the capital with a family background that met the threshold showed up. 30 or 40 of them sat in the flower hall, all decked out in floral hairpins and jade. The scent of their powder and rouge mixed with the smell of peonies from the corridor, so thick it was a bit choking. Crown Prince Xiaoxun stood by the Empress's side, wearing a moon-white brocade robe with subtle patterns and a jade crown tying his hair. From afar, he truly looked majestic and elegant. But aside from that first polite nod to the ladies, his gaze never left my older sister. My older sister was wearing a pinkish red wide-sleeved fairy dress today, which really stood out among all the young ladies in their pale colors. When Xiaoxun looked her way, she purposely turned her head to chat with the person next to her, but she just couldn't stop the corners of her mouth from turning up. They didn't even try to hide their blatant intimacy in front of the whole room of noble ladies. Anyone with eyes could clearly see what the Crown Prince was thinking. I remember this day in my past life. Xiaoxun originally planned to use the flower viewing banquet to officially introduce my older sister to the Empress. But halfway through the party, my sister got into an argument with her arch-nemesis, Xu Qingwei, the daughter of an earl. Xu Qingwei is notorious for her foul mouth and vicious heart. She purposely carried an inkstone of freshly ground ink, accidentally stumbled when passing by my sister, and splashed ink all over her. The water-red dress was stained with ink spots and soaked through. My sister trembled with anger, but Xu Qingwei covered her mouth and laughed. "Oh, my sister, how could you be so careless? Naturally, one cannot wear an ink-stained dress to meet the Empress." My sister hurriedly came looking for me, asking me to go to the side hall to change clothes with her. In my previous life, I changed with her as told. My figure was similar to hers, so the swapped dress actually fit quite well. It is just that during the hasty change, she accidentally rubbed ink onto the hem of my skirt, so it wasn't appropriate for me to go back to the banquet and show my face. I stayed alone by the stone railing at the lake, wiping it with a wet handkerchief, and then a hand pushed me down from behind. To this day, I still don't know who pushed me. I only heard Xu Qingwei's voice shouting shrilly from the shore. Simona fell into the water, followed by a flurry of chaotic footsteps. I was still struggling in the water when a figure leaped into the lake. As the water splashed, I saw those moon-white sleeves. When he fished me out of the water, he held me extremely tightly. I choked on the water and couldn't speak, only hearing his voice pouring right against my ear. "Huaye, don't be afraid, I am here." He didn't recognize my face. He only recognized the clothes I was wearing, that pinkish red Lucian dress. By the time the eunuch attendants helped us ashore soaking wet, the Empress had already heard the news and hurried over with her people. Xiao Shen looked down at me in his arms, my makeup smudged by the water, and his pupils suddenly shrank. He realized I wasn't Gu Huaye. The moment he realized his mistake, his fingers gripped my arms so hard it hurt, and his expression looked incredibly awful in front of everyone. But it was already too late. The madams and noble ladies present, and the old nannies next to the Empress, all saw His Highness the Crown Prince holding a soaking wet young woman in his arms, skin pressed against skin, the evidence undeniable. The Empress was a decisive person. She immediately smiled at the Emperor, who had rushed over as well. The Crown Prince has deep affection for the Gu family, miss. It looks like a match made in heaven to me. The Emperor rarely worried about this usually steady eldest son, so upon hearing this, he waved his hand and granted the marriage. And just like that, the position of Crown Princess fell right into my lap. My sister was squeezed at the very edge of the crowd, the smile on her face shattering before she could even put it away. She bit her lower lip, staring at me with totally red eyes, staring at me wearing her dress, being held in Xiaoxun's soaking wet arms. Xiaoxun opened his mouth to say something to her, but she kept shaking her head, refusing to listen. By the time I hastily changed my clothes and rushed over to find her, she raised her hand and swatted away the hand I reached out to help her, taking a step back to the other side of the Xiongfei bamboo curtain. That one step was the distance of 2 lifetimes. What happened after was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sister refused to see Xiaoxun, and Xiaoxun stood at the back door of the Prime Minister's residence all night, but she still didn't come out. Xiaoxun wanted to wait for the storm to blow over before pleading with Royal Father, but Sister was too angry to wait after locking herself in her room and crying for 3 days. The first thing she said when she opened the door was, "I am getting married. He can marry whoever he wants, and I'll marry whoever. I won't wait a single day more." Mother couldn't talk her out of it. Father couldn't talk her out of it. No one could talk her out of it. She chose the eldest son of the Liu family, Liu Yanji. Can't say she liked him all that much. His was just the one she casually picked up from the name cards the matchmaker handed over. The marriage was settled in a rush. On the day the bridal sedan left the house, my older sister walked past me covered in her red veil, the gold tassels hanging from her hairpin brushing against my shoulder. She didn't stop, and didn't even spare a single glance at Xiaoxun standing off to the side. My bridal sedan went towards the Eastern Palace. Her bridal sedan went towards the Liu residence in the east of the city, 2 different directions. The setting sun that dusk was incredibly big and incredibly red, lighting up the whole Duke Avenue so much it looked like it was flooded with blood. After Xiaoxun and I got married, the nights in the Eastern Palace were very long. The light in the study was on. He went through official documents, and I did my embroidery in the side room. Separating us was a moon gate with half-drawn curtains, and neither of us would even glance over to the other side. He couldn't possibly not know I was there, and he absolutely wouldn't step foot inside. He hated me for taking his sweetheart's place, and he hated himself too. Jumping into the lake to save someone that day was his own choice. He couldn't pin the blame on me, so he could only give me the cold shoulder. Occasionally, when we met at family banquets for major holidays and birthdays, we would sit side by side in the seats of the Crown Prince and Crown Princess, serving food and toasting the elders on both sides, cooperating flawlessly like a loving young married couple. Once the carriage drove back and the main doors of the Eastern Palace shut, he would head off to the study without looking back, and I would walk off to the bedroom without looking back. The servants were already used to it, just keeping their heads down and backing away, treating it as no big deal. I never asked him questions like, "Do you love me?" I knew the answer from the very first day we got married, and asking would just be humiliating myself. I revived that camellia in the courtyard that had been mostly eaten by bugs with cold water, and within a few days, it bloomed a whole tree full of white-petaled, yellow-stamened flowers again. Managing the Eastern Palace is the same logic as growing flowers water when it is time to water. Prune when it is time to prune. If you don't want a result, you don't need to hold expectations for anyone. Until that day was shortly after the spring equinox. By the Empress's decree, I went to Tianhua Temple outside the city to pray for the country. A few noblewomen from prominent families were also traveling with me. As the convoy advanced on the mountain road, we were suddenly ambushed by bandits. The guards hastily engaged them, and amidst the clashing of blades, I was roughly dragged deep into the mountain forest. There were over a dozen kidnappers in total. They locked me in a dilapidated hunter's cabin and threatened to make my father hand over 100,000 taels of silver for my ransom. I didn't cry and I didn't scream. I sharpened the end of my hairpin and hid it in the lining of my shoe sole. I carefully rationed the bowl of water and dry flatbread the guards brought every day. And while they were gambling and drunk at night, I used a sharp porcelain shard to grind through the hemp ropes on my hands. On the third night, I stabbed the night watchman's arm with the sharpened hairpin and rolled down the hillside in the chaos. The thorns and bushes scratched me up until there wasn't a good piece of flesh left on my body, and my ankle sprained while tumbling down, swelling so much it wouldn't fit into my shoe. But I finally made it to the foot of the mountain. At the crack of dawn, I ran into a patrol of mountain garrison troops. After stating my identity, I was sent back to the capital city on a fast horse. Father and Xiaoxun got the news at the same time and bumped into me halfway while bringing their men to meet me. I was helped out of the carriage, my clothes torn, my face completely covered in mud and dirt. Gritting my teeth, I said to Father, there were 14 bandits in total. 5 of them had tiger head tattoos, and the other 9 spoke with a Longzi accent. These aren't wandering bandits, they're coming for the Eastern Palace. Keeping me hostage was bait meant for the Crown Prince to see. Father's face changed. Xiaoxun's pupils shrank as well. He originally thought I was just some sheltered palace woman who would only cry and wait for him to save her after being kidnapped. He completely didn't expect that I could still calmly count the number of bandits and note their features while running for my life. After returning to the palace, he made a rare appearance in the bedroom. He sat across from me in silence, looking at my red, swollen ankle and asked with a straight face, "How did you escape?" I told him the whole story truthfully, sharpening the end of a hairpin, cutting the ropes with a porcelain shard, and rolling down the hill while they were drunk. As he listened, he gave a cold laugh, whining. "You are actually more ruthless than I thought." I didn't respond, he added. "I don't care how much blood you've shed these past 3 days, but since you came back alive, stop wearing that wronged face. If people think that even the Crown Princess can run into danger just going out to offer incense, both I and the Eastern Palace will be tainted with a reputation for incompetence." After saying that, he stood up, took 2 steps, paused, and didn't look back. The tassels of the bed curtain were still swaying gently in the breeze swept up by his shoulders. "The royal physician is waiting at the door. You have injuries, so apply the medicine as you should." This wasn't concern. This was just His Highness, the Crown Prince, being afraid that if the Crown Princess died, he'd have to find a new one, which is a hassle. I expressionlessly rolled up the sleeves of my outer dress to show the royal physician those bleeding scrapes. Xunhua stood beside me, biting her lip, not daring to make a sound, her hands trembling as she wiped my arm. I patted the back of her hand instead. "Don't shake, it is fine." After that, Xiaoxun's attitude towards me changed from giving the cold shoulder to watching closely. He probably felt I was someone not to be underestimated, a woman who could escape from kidnappers, and even bite back was a bit of a waste to leave in the backyard, yet untrustworthy to keep by his side. He started letting me participate in some affairs that were inconvenient for outside officials to meddle in, helping him proofread memorials submitted to the emperor for copying errors, checking the holiday gift lists sent by various mansions, and indirectly observing who was present and who was absent during the social exchanges between the Crown Prince and the other princes. A weird kind of unspoken understanding gradually developed between us. He didn't trust me, and I didn't trust him, but we found each other handy to use. That was way more reliable than whether or not we loved each other. The most dangerous time was right before he took the throne. The 5th Prince teamed up with a few officers from the Imperial Guards, biding their time to strike back, and ambushed Xiaoxun's carriage at the base of the Imperial City Wall. It was total chaos. He got shot in the shoulder by a hidden arrow, and I held him up as we hid in an abandoned barracks. The room was pitch black without a single candle. The street fighting was still going on outside, and the sounds of horse hooves and clashing swords vibrated in from near and far. He ran a fever all night long, completely delirious. I tore the hem of my inner skirt into strips to wrap the arrow wound on his shoulder. Looking at his pale side profile, I couldn't help but remember his arms wrapped tightly around me when he jumped into the water to save me at the flower viewing banquet all those years ago. Back then, he thought he was saving my older sister, but the one held tight in his arms was me. Reinforcements arrived right before dawn. His fever had broken by the time he woke up, and his voice was so hoarse he couldn't even speak. He just opened his eyes, saw me beside him, and stared blankly for a long time. so long that I thought the fever had messed with his head. But then he suddenly raised his hand and wiped a dried blood scab on my cheekbone with the pad of his finger. I couldn't really tell if that scab was from the blood on his shoulder or my own. Waning these past few years, he paused, didn't finish, and put his hand back down. I filled in the words he wanted to say but didn't speak out loud. It has been tough on you these past few years. He didn't deny it. After taking the throne, he crowned me empress. I was the former crown princess, and my father's family were old subordinates of the Minister of Revenue, so it made perfect sense for me to be made empress. With the new emperor taking the throne, the harem couldn't just stay empty, and a whole stack of portraits of concubines sent in by various manners piled up on my desk. I looked through them one by one, setting their ranks, assigning their palaces, and arranging his monthly daily life records. Beauty Shu, who got her title in the 3rd year, had the corners of her eyes tilted up way, and when she smiled, the curve of her mouth looked about 50 or 60%, like my older sister. Concubine Shui, who entered the palace in the 4th year, had a slightly arrogant look when looking at people from the side, which was also a shadow of my older sister. Later on, there were a few more. Some had a voice like hers, and some walked with the jingling sound of jade pendants just like her. I never asked half a word, and he never explained half a word to me. A wall has long stood between us. On this side of the wall is the Empress's dignity, and on later I fell seriously ill. The sickness struck like a landslide, dragging on for nearly a year in total. Xiao Xun had a few of the best imperial physicians from the Imperial Medical Department take turns holding consultations, personally brewed my medicinal soup and brought it to my bedside, and even excused everyone in the palace from paying their morning and evening respects to me. But while the illness came like a landslide, it didn't recede like spinning silk. On New Year's Eve that year, it snowed particularly hard. The brazier in the hall was burning fiercely. I suddenly felt a terrible tightness in my chest and called Xunhua to open the window. The window was barely half opened when the cold wind, wrapped in snow flurries, poured in. I slumped against the pillow and coughed several times. After coughing, I felt all the strength in my body draining away. Xiao Xun hurried in from outside, sending away all the servants before he even untied his cloak. He sat on the edge of the bed and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he just pulled up my thin quilt that had slipped down, pulling it right below my shoulders. His fingers touched the back of my hand exposed outside the quilt. His fingertips were icy cold. A corner of the smoky blue bed curtains was lifted by the wind pouring in, just like the green willow branches tossing in the wind by the lake on the day of the flower viewing banquet many years ago. He said, "It has been hard on you all these years." This was the first time he said this. It was also the last time. I closed my eyes. The snow outside the window was coming down hard, and the fire in the stove flickered bright and dim. I finally didn't have to hold on anymore. Lake water poured into my mouth and nose. It was freezing cold, carrying the unfaded chill of early spring, choking all the way from my nasal cavity down into my windpipe. I thrashed around in the water, splashing the water up high. The Lucian skirt worn as my outermost layer was completely soaked and dragged downwards, pulling my whole body straight down. Far away on the shore, someone was screaming shrilly. It was Xu Qingwei's voice. Some unknown fell into the water. Help! The Gu family's miss fell into the water. I saw that figure. On the shore 5 steps away, a person wearing a moon-white brocade robe stood against the light. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his standing posture was so familiar his right hand was slightly placed behind his back. That was his habitual posture developed since childhood. Back then at the birthday banquet in the Imperial Study, I was standing in the corner, and he was also standing far away just like this. It was Xiao Xun. He looked down at me struggling in the water. Sunlight passed through the bamboo grove from behind him and shone down, casting a patch of bright and dark spots on his face. He lowered his eyes to look at me thrashing in the water. His gaze wasn't like looking at a drowning person, but rather like looking at something he never wanted to pick up again. Then he turned around and left. He left very decisively. His moon-white back passed through the green shadows of the bamboo grove, and in the blink of an eye he vanished into the bustling hubbub of the flower-viewing banquet over there. No pausing, no looking back, not even the slightest falter in his footsteps. I suddenly understood. He had come back too. From the moment he turned around, The string in my heart that had been taut for 2 lifetimes suddenly snapped. If it snapped, then so be it. I twisted my body in the water and swam towards the shore using the swimming strokes he had taught me in an extremely humiliating way in my previous life. My movements were rusty, but having been forced to soak in the pond for a whole summer in my past life, my body already remembered how to swing my arms and kick the water. Several palace maids on the shore scrambled to pull me up. I held onto the stone railing and coughed up water, half of my hair bun undone, with bits of waterweed and mud sticking to my skirt's hem, looking absolutely pathetic. But I kept laughing, coughing and laughing at the same time. The palace maids surrounding me thought I was scared silly, busy draping a blanket over me and patting my back. No one knew what I was laughing at. I was laughing because he didn't jump down this time. That is right. He won't be held back by me anymore. He is going to chase after his guhaya, and I finally won't have to be chosen by him anymore either. As early as when my older sister got splashed with ink by Xu Qingwei and came to me to swap clothes, I had personally cut off that path. Huining, quick, let's swap clothes. The Empress wants to see me right away. How can I go looking like this? My older sister had been impatient since childhood. As she spoke, she was already unfastening the outer gown soiled with ink, pressing my hand onto the clean dress she brought. In my past life, I didn't say much and immediately swapped clothes with my older sister. But in this life, my hand taking the clothes didn't move, sister. My voice was very calm, so calm that it didn't quite sound like I was speaking for myself. Just wear my outer robe. I'll have Luju go to the carriage parked outside the palace gate to fetch my spare dress. I am feeling a bit unwell, so I'll go wait in the side hall first, change my clothes, and then come find you back at the banquet. Sister froze for a moment. I rarely refused her. Ever since we were little, I gave her whatever she wanted. Being rejected by me for the first time, she was a bit surprised, but being in a hurry to change clothes, she didn't think much of it, hurriedly throwing on my outer robe and running back to the banquet. Luju quickly fetched the spare dress from the carriage. I took my time changing in the side hall, then picked out a plain white magnolia hairpin from the jewelry box and pinned it in my hair. That hairpin was left to Mother by Grandmother. Mother thought it wasn't luxurious enough and casually tossed it in a box, but it was one that I really liked. By the time I returned to the flower viewing banquet, the atmosphere at the banquet had completely changed. Xiao Xun was kneeling in front of the Emperor and Empress with sister. He knelt perfectly straight, his back tense, and there wasn't a hint of hesitation when he spoke. The Emperor sat in the main hall with the Empress sitting by the Emperor's side, as the room full of noble ladies and madams watched this sudden marriage proposal in dead silence. Imperial father, Imperial mother, the Crown Prince's voice was firm and powerful, pausing at every word as if afraid someone might miss even half a syllable. The person I love is Minister Gu's eldest legitimate daughter, Gu Huaye. I beg Imperial father for your blessing. I saw my mother sitting at her seat not far away, the teacup in her hand almost dropping. My father was relatively composed, only the fingers stroking his beard paused for a moment. Older sister knelt beside Xiao Xun, her eyes red, unsure if she was excited or scared. She stole a glance at Xiao Xun, and Xiao Xun turned his head and gave her a slight smile, that smile carrying the joy of regaining what was lost, built up over 2 lifetimes. She immediately straightened her back, looking like a little peacock that had just won a fight. The Emperor laughed out loud. The eldest legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue. Her status is quite a match. Since you picked her out yourself, how could I not grant your wish? Get up. The Empress smiled and nodded in agreement. But as her gaze swept up and down my sister, there was an extremely faint trace of scrutiny deep in her eyes. That kind of scrutiny wasn't malicious nitpicking, but the precise judgment of a woman who had lived in the palace for 30 years evaluating a new bride about to enter the family. The way she looked at my sister was like looking at a piece of unpolished rough jade. It looked spirited, but its edges were too sharp and would take some work. But she didn't say anything, merely wearing the Empress's smile and hiding this scrutiny within her impassive dignity. The whole proposal, from popping the question to getting the nod, took less than the time it takes an incense stick to burn. After the Emperor and Empress left the banquet, the entire flower viewing party was left with nothing but endless congratulations and whispers. The Crown Prince proposing in public, what a huge honor. The eldest miss of the Gu family is so lucky. Right, the way the crown prince protects her, it is like she is the apple of his eye. Sis stood in the middle of the flower hall, taking in the congrats from all sides. She smugly raised an eyebrow at Xu Qingwei in the distance and stuck her tongue out at her, clearly showing off to her arch-nemesis. Xu Qingwei's face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. She bit her lower lip, dug her nails into the silk handkerchief in her hand, and finally scurried off with her tail between her legs. Xiaoxin stood right next to Sis, watching her look all smug and triumphant without saying a word. He just smiled and lightly tapped her nose. His touch as gentle as if he were handling fragile porcelain. Watching this scene, I felt like a scab had been gently peeled off from somewhere in my heart. Sis was bright and proud, and Xiaoxin got exactly what he wanted. He was smiling, and so was she. This time there were no misunderstandings, no falling into the water, and no one stealing anyone else's dress or identity. They finally went back to the original script, the male lead and the female lead. And I was finally not the stand in getting mistaken for the female lead anymore. I smiled, then turned and walked away. But unexpectedly, I almost bumped right into someone. I don't know when the Empress came to stand by the rockery behind me, followed by only an old nanny. She was very close to me, so close that, just by looking down, she could see my hair ends that hadn't had time to dry yet, having just been fished out of the water. I managed to change clothes, but didn't have time to comb my long hair dry, and the tips of my hair were still dripping fine, dense beads of water. "Are you the girl who fell into the water, but told the maids not to make a fuss so as not to disturb the banquet?" The Empress's voice wasn't exactly warm, but it didn't sound perfunctory either. I hurriedly took 3 steps back and properly performed a deep curtsy. This subject has forgotten her manners. Please forgive me. Her Majesty the Empress. At least you know the rules. Get up. The Empress raised her hand, signaling me to stand. Her gaze fell on the white magnolia hairpin by my temple, then swept over my conventional goose yellow dress. This outfit probably wasn't considered outstanding in her eyes, but it won out for being plain and safe, standing with a hall full of noble ladies competing in beauty. I was like the only uncolored white flower painted into a vibrant, heavily inked peony painting. The old nanny behind the Empress leaned in and whispered something, probably recognizing my identity. The Empress's eyebrows twitched slightly, and she sized me up all over again. Her gaze this time was different from when she looked at my older sister earlier, not scrutinizing, but weighing. "So you are the second miss of the Giyu family who gifted that Suzhou embroidery of a phoenix flying through peonies during my 1000 Autumns festival." I lowered my eyes. It was just a meager display of my skills. "I don't deserve such praise from your Majesty." "The Suzhou embroidery of a phoenix flying through peonies." The Empress slowly repeated these words, as if savoring the aftertaste of a cup of tea, her voice actually carrying some genuine appreciation. "I still have that embroidery hanging on the west wall of my bedchamber. To be able to master the double-sided 3 different technique in Suzhou embroidery at such a young age. The embroidery masters in the capital who could teach such a disciple can probably be counted on one hand. Your Majesty flatters me. It is my embroidery master who taught me well. I just copied the drafts for a few days and followed the pattern. I actually think that copying a draft to the point of passing it off as the real thing isn't just the master's skill." Her Majesty, the Empress, scrutinized me again, her gaze lingering on me for much longer than before. Then she sighed, looked toward the direction of the bustling hall from just now, and muttered something to herself. I heard what she said. She said, "It is quite a pity, though." She didn't finish saying what was a pity. Perhaps that I understood everything, and I didn't say a thing. I just bowed deeply, respectfully, seeing the Empress off. There won't be many chances to see each other again in the future. To me, she is probably just that noble lady across 2 lifetimes who treated me pretty well, but with whom I had no fate to become mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. I don't know when Xiaoxun circled out from behind me, when his voice suddenly rang out behind my back. It carried an inexplicable chill. "Guhuaining, what did you just say to my royal mother again?" His sudden voice startled me, and I turned around to meet his eyes full of defensiveness and questioning. His brows were furrowed, and his gaze held that same old guarded look exactly like in the previous life. as if me saying a couple more words to his family meant I was plotting some scheme. Her Highness just casually asked me a few questions, I answered calmly, taking a step back to put some distance between us. Humph, Xiaoxun sneered. His voice kept so low that only I could hear it. You still love to flatter and suck up to the elders like this. But I advise you, you'd better drop those thoughts of taking the opportunity to climb the social ladder as soon as possible. In this life, they won't be of any use anymore, understand? My body stiffened slightly, but then immediately regained its calm. He was still him. In my past life, Xiaoxun always had this self-righteous look in front of me, whatever he believed was the truth, and whoever he disliked deserved to be questioned. In my previous life, I was troubled by his attitude for half my life, acting cautiously terrified that if I didn't do well enough, he would despise me even more. But in this life, I don't need to care anymore. I don't understand what your Highness is saying. I lowered my eyes, my voice flat, neither servile nor overbearing. I was merely answering a few questions truthfully from Her Majesty the Empress just now. Just as he was about to say something, my sister walked over from the side, smiling sweetly, and linked her arm through Xiaoxun's. Xiaoxun, why are you being so mean to my sister? Huining has been sensible since she was little. How could she have any ideas about climbing the social ladder? Xiaoxun almost couldn't keep a straight face when she grabbed his arm. He helplessly turned his head to look at my sister, his tone instantly softening. Huaiye, you are too protective of your sister. She is scheming in her heart on how to use you to climb up, yet here you are foolishly helping her count the money. My sister was amused by his helpless tone. She stood on her tiptoes and tapped Xiaoxun's forehead. What do you know? Huameining is my sister. She would never harm me. But you, if you dare be mean to her again, I am going to get mad. Xiaoxun got tapped on the head by her, and actually lowered his head like he was obediently admitting he was wrong, breaking into a gentle smile. Watching this scene, I couldn't even feel a single ripple of emotion in my heart. What I wanted to say was, Xiaoxun, you really don't need to guard against me like this. I am not that person anymore. I won't be dragged into your story by you again to be your unwilling supporting character. But saying this out loud would be pointless. He'd just think I was making excuses. I just bowed, turned around and left. From behind came the sound of my sister laughing as she leaned into Xiaoxun's ear to whisper, along with Xiaoxun's gentle movement of brushing the stray hairs from her temples. As my footsteps faded away, my heart quieted down too. It was already dusk when the flower viewing banquet ended. The setting sun dyed the peonies in the garden orange-red, and the palace maids lined up to clear the cups, plates and bowls from the tables. I was just about to get into the carriage when I heard the news coming from the inner palace. Xu Qingwei, due to her poor conduct, was punished by the Empress to go back and reflect on her mistakes behind closed doors. The Empress had uncovered the truth that Xu Qingwei had instructed her maid to push someone into the water at the palace banquet. Every single detail was crystal clear. I stood by the carriage and listened to the news, not moving for a long while. So Xu Qingwei was the one who pushed me into the water. In my previous life, she was also the one who pushed me into the water. In my previous life, I was the one who fell into the water. The one Xiaoxun carried ashore, the one the Empress smiled at and bestowed a marriage upon face to face, the one whose hand my sister shook off, and the one who bore the blame of stealing my sister's marriage for most of my life. Yet the real culprit was never held accountable. But in this life, Xiaoxun didn't jump in. The water was just as cold, and I still choked down a bellyful of water, but without that embrace fishing me out. The course of everything was completely different. My sister wouldn't mistakenly think I stole her lover, and I wouldn't be burdened by a bestowed marriage tying my fate to the crown prince. Xu Qingwei giving me this push actually helped me escape that dead end. Come to think of it, she could even be considered my benefactor. Holding Chenhua's hand, I got into the carriage. As the curtain fell, I leaned against the carriage wall and closed my eyes. The wheels rolled over the stone slabs of the palace road with a dull rumbling sound. I rolled up my sleeve and took a look. There was a red mark on my wrist left from scraping against a sharp rock in the lake just now. It wasn't deep and it would heal in a couple of days, much lighter than those injuries from my previous life. Back at the manor, the front hall was already bustling with activity. Father's usually stern face actually wrinkled into a smile right now. and he couldn't keep the corners of his mouth down no matter how hard he tried. Mother was even more over the top, holding Arjie's hand and looking her up and down like she was meeting her own daughter for the first time. A few aunts from the clan also rushed over after hearing the news, surrounding Arjie and chiming in one after another to flatter her. Huayu is so lucky. The crown prince proposed in front of all the noble ladies of the court. That is a huge honor. You'll be Her Highness the Crown Princess from now on, Huayu. You've got to make us proud. If you make it big, sister, don't forget your little sister. Surrounded and praised by a crowd of people, my sister got a bit carried away, blushing as she responded to them one by one. She actually had no idea what she was about to face. She just felt that Xiaoxun proposing to her in public was an incredibly glorious thing, that she had beaten Xu Qingwei, beaten all the noble ladies in the capital city, beaten everyone. Xiaoxun really didn't lie to her. In their past life, he had said countless times, "You are the one I want to marry." Back then, she refused to listen, smashing things after hearing it, crying until she dry heaved. In this life, he said these words to the whole world, and she finally believed it. I am happy for her too. She doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of her past life, doesn't have to marry a man she doesn't love out of spite, and won't end up dying violently at the hands of bandits in the future. She got the ending she deserved, and I can finally step completely out of her life and go live my own. Early the next morning, I asked my mother to start looking for a marriage match for me. Mother was looking over the monthly shopping list the butler brought in. Hearing what I just said, she paused for a second, put down the list, and looked me up and down a few times, as if checking to see if I was joking. How old are you even? What is the rush? She casually brushed me off at first. I knew it wasn't because she thought I was too young. My older sister and I are the same age, barely a year apart. She can be the crown princess, while in my mother's eyes I probably only amount to a no need to rush. Since my older sister's marriage is settled, mine will have to be discussed sooner or later. While the young masters of the various estates in the capital haven't been spoken for by other families, looking early gives us more options to choose from. I said unhurriedly, my tone as calm as if we were chatting about what to have for breakfast tomorrow. Mother actually listened. She thought it over and probably figured I made a good point. The Zhu family has 2 daughters. The older one hooked the crown prince, so if the younger one delays getting engaged for too long, there is bound to be gossip saying the Zhu family only cares about the eldest daughter and neglects the second. Besides, if the legitimate second daughter's future in-laws are too shabby, it would also hurt my older sister's face as the crown princess. All right, since you brought it up, Mother will start making arrangements for you. She agreed reluctantly, but she worked fast. 3 days later, a stack of portraits and calling cards was sent to my room, a colourful pile covering a small section of my desk. I flipped through them one by one, and my fingers stopped when I got to one of them. It was Lu Yanzhi, the eldest young master of the Lu family, who my sister married out of spite in my past life. Looked pretty much the same in the portrait as in my memory: square face, thick eyebrows, and an honest smile. He just looked like a reliable guy. In my past life, my sister didn't have a good time after marrying him. It wasn't that Lu Yanzhi treated her poorly, their personalities just clashed. My sister found him dull, and he couldn't keep up with her romantic little whims. Later, when my sister was brutally killed by bandits, and the bad news reached the capital city, I heard that Lu Yanzhi knelt in front of her mourning hall for a whole day and night. The man who cried the most miserably was actually the one she used to scold the most. Speaking of which, he is a good match. Just not a good match for me. I flipped his portrait over, and just as I was about to pick up the next one, my hand stopped in mid-air without any warning. The third one from the bottom, the portrait showed a young man slouching sideways in an armchair, his lips curved in a half-smile, and his long, narrow phoenix eyes looked somewhat nonchalant under the painter's brush. His posture was loose, and his expression frivolous, but his clothes were extremely gorgeous, a sapphire blue brocade robe trimmed with gold thread, with a half-finger-sized jade pixie hanging at his waist. I recognized this face. Even though the portrait lacked some of his real vibe, I haven't forgotten those half-smiling eyes in both of my lifetimes. The heir to the Duke of Huguo, She Jilin. In my previous life, this name was just as well known in the capital as it is now, only the ranking lists were different. Right now, he is a regular on the Playboy list. But in the future, he would be a vital minister who earned the merit of helping Xiaoxun take the throne. I still clearly remember that battle where he marched thousands of miles from the northern frontier to save the emperor. Later, when Xiaoxun was giving out rewards based on merit at the court assembly, he said several goods to him in a row. But his portrait and name card, why would they show up among the families I am supposed to meet for matchmaking? Mother saw me staring at that portrait for quite a while, leaned over for a glance, and her brows immediately twisted into a knot. Let's just pass on this one. Even though the heir to the Duke of Hugo has a high enough family status, this guy only knows how to fool around with cockfighting and dog racing all day. I even heard before that there were some shady rumors going around about him and a lead actress from an opera troupe. He really doesn't seem like a decent person. Mom will pick a few better ones for you. Let me look a bit longer. I laid his portrait flat and didn't move it anywhere else. Mother thought I was just curious, so she curled her lips and didn't say much to dissuade me. I, however, stared at those half-smiling phoenix eyes in the portrait, silently going over the memories of my previous life in my mind. Shi Jilin, the only son of Duke Hugo, suddenly raised troops to defend the emperor in my past life just before Xiaoxun ascended the throne, slaying the frontier rebel generals with the force of a thunderbolt. After Xiaoxun took the throne, he was appointed as a first-class general and received an imperial golden token for free passage through the inner palace. Yet before I passed away, I seemingly never heard of him taking a wife, nor did I ever hear of him having any close concubines or servant girls around him. During a palace-wide banquet one year in my past life, I had seen him once. I was already the empress then, and he stood at the farthest edge of the banquet, the mandated distance from the throne for a third-rank military officer, bowing to me from afar. The sachet hanging at his waist had a magnolia flower embroidered on it. The needlework wasn't extremely fine, but you could see the embroiderer put a lot of heart into it. That solitary flower hung below his golden belt, surrounded by everyone's sachets and jade pendants. Yet it was the only flower. I thought to myself then, this guy is quite interesting. Later, among the annual birthday gifts and festival tributes from officials everywhere, the gift list sent by Duke Hugo's mansion was always the one that struck my fancy the most. Neither too much nor too little, neither standing out enough to draw attention, nor so perfunctory as to look bad. It was like this year after year. I once laughed and said to Chinois, I don't know where Duke Hugo's mansion hired such an incredibly worldly wise steward. Thinking about it now, maybe it wasn't some steward. Mother suddenly spoke from another direction, snapping me out of my wandering thoughts. Come to think of it, the Duke of Hugo's estate has never sent a matchmaking invitation before, even though this young Lord Shi has a bad reputation. His family's status is still there, and he never joins these matchmaking events. I wonder what has gotten into him this time to actually send his name card over on his own. My fingertips gently touched the corner of the portrait, pressing down on that glimmer of gold thread. When my sister burst through the door, I was just folding Shijilin's portrait and stuffing it into the little drawer at the very bottom of my vanity box. She didn't notice my hand movements, though. Her focus wasn't on me. She had a whole bunch of nonsense she needed to get off her chest. Whining, come stroll through the Lantern Festival with me tonight. That jerk Xiaoxun said he has official business to handle for Mid-Autumn. It is the Mid-Autumn Festival. He can't even spend the Mid-Autumn Festival with me, and he still talked about wanting to protect me well. What a liar, my sister complained incessantly, puffing her cheeks as she sat in the rose chair next to me. She angrily grabbed dried peaches from the plate and stuffed them into her mouth, mumbling indistinctly as she chewed, "We'll go by ourselves and ignore him." Mother happened to be in my room too. Hearing her say this, she laughed and poked her forehead. "You are about to become the crown princess, yet you are still so impulsive in the future. You are going to help the crown prince manage the Eastern Palace. Behave yourself. If outsiders see that His Highness married a little monkey, won't they laugh at him?" Sis didn't even dodge when Mother poked her forehead. Instead, she proudly raised her chin, touched her forehead that had been poked red, and said pretentiously, "I am not going to learn those proper manners. Xiaoxun said he just likes me this way, saying I am innocent and spontaneous. Better than those." She abruptly paused halfway through her sentence, glanced at me, swallowed back the words, "better than those who put on airs." and changed her tune with a heh laugh, much better than those who pretend to be mature. I knew what she originally meant to say. Much more interesting than whining putting on airs. I didn't take it to heart. I've heard things like this too much growing up. It stopped hurting a long time ago. Sis is mom and dad's apple of their eye. Xiaoxun's precious white moonlight, the sun, moon and little stars of the whole family I've known since I was little. That I am not meant for that role, and I don't plan to fight with anyone over it. Instead, mother casually called me out, whining, you accompany your sister tonight. It'll be crowded at the Lantern Festival. You are sharp, so keep a closer eye on your sister. Don't let her get into any mishaps. If she stirs up trouble again and offends someone, it won't look good for the Crown Prince either. After saying that, mother left, conveniently assigning me a sis's sidekick. I watched my mother's back as she walked out the door, not even sighing. It has always been the rule since I was a kid. Whenever a Gia wants to go out and play, mom and dad are afraid she'll cause trouble, so they make me tag along. If a Gia caused trouble, I'd be the first one asked, why didn't you keep an eye on your sister? At first I would feel wronged, but not anymore. The scariest thing about getting used to something is that it slowly just becomes a given. For the evening Lantern Festival, we rode the family carriage to the entrance of the Lantern Market Street by the river. The whole street wound along the river for miles. Lotus lanterns floated on the water, and all sorts of lanterns hung along the riverbank. Rabbit lanterns, revolving scenic lanterns, gauze lanterns of Changi flying to the moon, and glass lanterns of a boy holding a fish. Layers of warm light reflected on the river surface, shattering into golden scales. The street was packed with people. Hawkers' shouts rose and fell. A long line formed in front of the lantern riddle stall, and the burnt sweet smell of sugar-roasted chestnuts drifted from one end of the alley to the other. Sister was quite excited at first, touching this and looking at that, tugging at my sleeve and chattering away. But after strolling around for about half an hour, her attention began to wander. First, she would look into the crowd from time to time, as if searching for something. And then she stared blankly at a candied haw vendor for a while. That was the candied haw Xiaoxun had bought for her in her previous life. Finally, she stood in front of a lantern stall, looked at that begonia-shaped gauze lantern, and suddenly fell silent. Xiaoxun is really something. It is obviously a day like the Mid-Autumn Festival, yet he still says he is tied up with some stupid errand. She twirled the tanghulu stick in her hand over and over, the bamboo skewer poking a tiny red sugar mark on the edge of her lips, her voice dropping. If he really cared about me, how could he not even spare a single night? I stood beside her, and before I could even open my mouth to comfort her, I caught sight of a figure out of the corner of my eye. Somanong was standing under the shadow of the wutong trees across the river, dressed in a black brocade robe with a jade pendant at his waist, with two plainclothes attendants trailing behind. Even though he had a plain wooden half-mask covering his face, I'd recognized that stance, the habitual gesture of resting his right hand slightly behind his back even after 10 lifetimes. It was Xiaoxun. He didn't go off to run errands at all. It was probably just too inconvenient for him to squeeze into the crowd and swagger through the streets as the Crown Prince. I turned my head and said softly, "Sis, look ahead." Sis looked up in the direction I indicated, across the pedestrians coming and going, across the glow of the colourful festive lanterns, across the array of lotus lanterns, floating on the river. She saw that masked man on the opposite bank. She recognized him anyway. She let out a scream and dashed out. She shoved the tanghulu in her hand straight into my arms and plunged into the crowd like an arrow. By the time she stumbled and pushed her way through the crowd to the opposite bank, Xiaoxun had already taken off his mask and reached out to catch her as she threw herself at him. She crashed into his arms, knocking him back a step before he steadied himself, the hem of his moon-white robe fluttering in the river breeze. "Didn't you say you had errands, liar?" Sis glared at him, her eyes wide enough to hold the lights of the entire Lantern River. Xiaoxun lowered his head and used his sleeve to wipe away the leftover sugar stains from the corner of her mouth, his voice as low and gentle as tonight's moonlight. "I came to find you after finishing my official business. I was afraid you'd be disappointed being alone, but I was also afraid of bringing too many people and disturbing the Lantern Festival. So I only brought a few plainclothes guards." He looked up and saw me on the opposite bank through the light. His gaze pierced through the glow of the 2 rows of lanterns, through the thin mist rising from the river, and landed precisely on my face. That look was cold and distant, like he was looking at some background scenery just to confirm it was there. He gave a slight nod, a nod that was incredibly shallow and fast. Then he looked away, his eyes landing back on Ajay, not sparing another glance at the other side. I knew exactly what that look meant. He was checking to see if I was going to be clueless and get too close in this lifetime, if I was going to squeeze between him and Ajay again as that unwanted third wheel. Once confirmed and the coast was clear, he could comfortably put all his attention on his little girl. Behind me was Xiaoxun's voice, so gentle it was almost doting, saying to Ajay the words he had waited a whole lifetime to finally get the chance to say again. I told myself a long time ago, this time I am going to protect you well. I can't let you down again. I'll definitely do what I promised you. That last sentence wasn't meant for Ajay, it was meant for himself. It was for the Xiaoxun from his past life, the one who failed to protect Huayue and lived out the rest of his days full of regret through endless misunderstandings and missed chances. What he needed to do in this lifetime was crystal clear: marry Ajay, protect Ajay, and make up for the regrets of his previous life. And as for me, I was his mistake from his past life. I was also the person he needed to completely cut ties with in this one. Ajay was coaxed by him until all her anger vanished, pulling his sleeve and happily skipping around the various stalls. She held up a tangulu and shoved it towards Xiaoxun's mouth. Xiaoxun lowered his head and took a small bite, his brows furrowing so hard they could crush a fly. He hated sweets the most, just like in his previous life. But to make Ajay happy, he still chewed a few times and swallowed it, then was pulled by her to the next stall. In front of the stall for solving riddles to win lanterns, Ajay dragged Xiaoxun, insisting that he solve a riddle to win a begonia lantern for her. Xiaoxun picked up a brush and wrote a line of words on the riddle paper, the look in his eyes when he turned back to look at her, doting yet helpless. Your Highness's talent wasn't a waste after all. Ajay hugged the begonia lantern she won, looking completely smug. Xiaoxun reached out and ruffled her hair, only to be slapped away by her grumpily. It really was beautiful. More beautiful than the Mid-Autumn Lantern Festival of any year in my memory. I stood on the opposite bank of the river, still holding the tangulu Ajay had shoved into my arms. I didn't follow them over. Xunhua asked me quietly from the side, his second miss not going over, and I shook my head. Over there was the Lantern Festival for the two of them. If I went over, I would just be the extra one. I'll stroll around by myself, walking a few dozen steps down the riverbank, and turning past a stone archway. The crowd here had thinned out a lot, probably because it was further from the main street. The liveliness of guessing lantern riddles and floating river lanterns over there felt a layer removed, leaving only the distant clamour and the slight sound of the water lapping against the shore nearby in my ears. When the night breeze blew over, it carried the dampness of the river water and the sweet scent of osmanthus from afar, making it actually more comfortable than over on the main street. Suddenly, a piercing cry rang out from behind. I jerked my head back. A little girl, about 4 or 5, had been knocked to the ground by the pushing crowd. Her little arms and legs, skinny as twigs, were sprawled out on the stone pavement. Her cries were so faint amidst the roaring crowd that you could barely hear them. The shoving crowd kept surging forward, and the people in the back didn't even notice a kid lying on the ground. Several pairs of feet were just about to step right on her. I didn't have time to think much. I lunged over, bent down, and scooped her entirely into my arms, arching my back at the same time to try and protect her. Right at the moment I bent down, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a massive object bearing down on us. The tall wooden stand from the neighbouring stall, covered in lanterns and brass bells, had been shoved until it was tottering, and with a final tilt its entire weight tipped toward us. The tin signboard on top of the stand smashed onto the flagstones by my feet first with a loud clang, kicking up bits of gravel that stung the side of my leg. The stand itself came crashing down right after second miss. I heard Lu Zhu's voice crack in a scream, tightly hugged the little girl in my arms, curled up, buried my head, and braced my back against the collapse. The shelf didn't crash down onto me. A gust of wind swept past my left side. A figure suddenly lunged over from the side and kicked the crossbeam of the falling wooden shelf. The force of that kick was massive, forcibly changing the direction of the entire man-tall shelf, sending it flying sideways for 3 or 4 feet before it crashed heavily onto the stone floor. Broken wood splinters sprayed all over the ground, and a copper bell went rolling right to my feet. I looked up. The lantern light and broken shadows intertwined across his body. The warm orange of the firelight illuminated his clean-faced phoenix eyes. A high-nosed bridge, the corners of his lips naturally turned up slightly, born with a smiling face. But right now, there wasn't a hint of a smile on his face. His first reaction after kicking over the wooden shelf was to turn around and grab my sleeve, scanning me up and down, tugging at my cuffs, collar and arms, like checking if a porcelain vase dropped from a high place had any chipped corners. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Does it hurt anywhere? The dandy, who seemed to have stepped right out of a painting, stood in front of me. He was wearing a loose brocade robe trimmed with gold thread, and hanging at his waist was that familiar jade pyxie. But the front of his robe was half askew, and his belt was half undone. I couldn't tell if it was because he ran too fast just now, or if it came loose when he kicked the stand. He was even panting as he spoke, like he had run over from somewhere really far away. The little girl's mother stumbled over from who knows which direction, covered in wrinkles from being squeezed through the crowd. She scooped the kid up from the ground into her arms, bowing to him and me over and over with endless thanks, her words of gratitude coming out completely incoherent. The little girl rested on her mum's shoulder and slowly stopped crying, glanced back at us with teary eyes, and waved her little hand at me. I waved back at her and waited for them to go far away before standing up. I smoothed out my crumpled collar and gave the man in front of me a proper earnest bow of thanks. "Thank you very much, young Lord Shi." He waved his hands a half-beat too fast, so fast it could almost be called panicked. "It is nothing, no big deal, second Miss Gu, don't worry about it. My dad is the Duke of Hugo. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Besides, he suddenly got stuck here, forcefully swallowing the second half of the sentence back down. His ears quickly flushed a faint pink, and his voice suddenly trailed off. "Besides, anyway, you are really not hurt, right?" "No." Young Lord arrived just in time. I looked down at the wood chips stuck to my cuff and casually brushed them off. When I looked up again, I realized he was still standing right in front of me, not having left. Everyone comes to the Lantern Festival with a companion. Men and women in pairs, either parents leading their children, or brothers and sisters walking together, or else like my sister in Shaoxun, where one feeds Tanghulu and the other complains it is too sweet. Someone like me, dumped halfway by my sister, is probably rare. But he was all alone, a notorious playboy who has played around with everything, with not a single companion by his side at the Mid-Autumn Lantern Festival, nor any servants following him. What is he doing all alone by this increasingly deserted riverbank? I glanced at his still crooked collar, and then at the lantern held by his servant in the distance, judging from the direction he was standing just now. He originally seemed to intend to head in the direction where my sister and I parted ways. A thought formed in my mind. Before I even had time to mentally deny it, I spoke up. "Is young Lord Shi strolling through the Lantern Festival alone?" He coughed once. Just casually coming out for a stroll." His eyes flickered, and he subconsciously scuffed his toe against the floor tile. That move was so boyish, totally unlike the reaction you'd expect from a grown man. I stared at the tip of his scuffing boot for a few breaths, suddenly feeling the urge to laugh. Over 2 lifetimes, past and present, I've seen way too many shrewd people, but someone who wears all their thoughts on their toes while being completely oblivious to it is really quite rare. "Then, may I invite the young lord to take a stroll together, and let me think about how to thank young Lord Shi for saving my life?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. The redness at the tips of his ears visibly spread upwards, and even the sides of his face began to turn red. No need. It was just the effort of lifting a hand, lifting a foot. You don't have to take it to heart, really. He babbled a bunch of nonsense, turning the effort of lifting a hand into lifting a hand and a foot, his voice dropping so low by the last word that it was almost inaudible. I didn't know what other woman in a past life or this one would ever tie the word invite to him, so young Lord Shi is really that unwilling to take a stroll with me. He looked up in a panic, shaking his head frantically, only to realize he was overreacting. He froze there, caught in a dilemma, his face completely spelling out the struggle of "I really want to, but I am afraid of being too forward with you." I couldn't hold it back and let out a soft chuckle. After laughing, I looked away and stared down at the almost melted tanghulu in my hand. A Jer had shoved it into my hands. I didn't want to eat it anymore, but I couldn't just throw it away either. Wait for me a sec, but he seemed to suddenly remember something, turning around and taking off in long strides toward his servant. He grabbed something from his servant's hands, then jogged right back in long strides. The hem of his brocade robe caught the wind as he ran, and his sash ended up getting jolted even more crooked. Once he came to a stop in front of me. I didn't look at what was in his hands, I noticed the front of his robe first. It was all crooked. Half of his inner lapel had been blown inside out by the wind, making him look even less like the glittering playboy from the painting. I couldn't hold back. I reached out and smoothed his flipped-out inner lapel flat, used my fingertips to retie his loose sash, and casually straightened the pixie pendant on his waist that had gotten knocked crooked. Young Lord Shi, even though the Mid-Autumn Festival isn't some grand holiday, looking so dishevelled, still isn't very good. He froze from his inner lapel to his sash. Even his breathing stopped for several breaths. By the time I took a step back to put some distance between us, the tips of his ears were already completely red. He tried to keep the corners of his mouth down but couldn't, and with his head lowered, he held out the thing he'd been carrying all the way over. For you, it was a lantern. A magnolia flower lantern. The petals were made of white silk gauze as thin as cicada wings, each one stretched individually over a frame tied together with fine bamboo strips. 6 petals formed a half-open magnolia, and the center was a small candle about the length of a finger. The flickering candlelight shone through the white silk, giving the petals a soft glow somewhere between milky white and moon yellow. It lit up his hands as he held it out to me, and also lit up a corner of my heart that had been pitch black for a long time. What a coincidence. Magnolias are my absolute favorite, he knew. The thought in my mind finally clicked into place. The holiday gifts in my past life that were always exactly what I wanted, that sense of boundaries that was never too flashy but always perfectly spot on. That magnolia flower embroidered on a sachet at a man's waist. So it was him. The things she didn't know in her past life she could finally see clearly in this one. I casually glanced up at him as I took the lantern. He was smiling, not that weak playboy smirk from the portrait, but an expression so clumsy it was almost silly, trying to hold back his joy but completely failing to hide it. I walked side by side with him along the river carrying a magnolia lantern. The reflections of the painted boat's lanterns on the river flowed beneath our feet like crushed gold. Chunhua trailed far behind, so tactful it hardly seemed like her. When we walked under the shade of an old locust tree, I deliberately missed a step. The step underfoot was a bit shorter than I imagined, and my body pitched forward completely off guard. Careful, his reaction was even faster than I expected. He instinctively reached out and grabbed me, his arm wrapping around my waist to pull my whole body back toward him. He didn't control his strength, and I crashed right into his arms. The side of my face pressed against the gold thread embroidery on his lapel, which was slightly warmed by the lantern light. I looked up, my gaze reflecting in his eyes, and softly said the words I had been turning over in my head the whole way. I suddenly thought of how to thank young Lord Shi. What do you think about me giving myself to you? His arms stiffened, and then he let go. He was so shocked that he let go. My body was suddenly released, and my center of gravity dropped again. He hastily scooped me back up, holding me much tighter than before, so tight it almost felt like he wanted to knead me into his clothes. Startled by his sudden letting go and grabbing me back, I let out a low gasp in his arms, then looked up at him, his whole face and neck flushed the color of cooked shrimp and crab. His phoenix eyes were full of disbelief that I wasn't joking, disbelief that I was telling the truth. Huining, what are you two doing? A voice smashed over from behind me. He and I turned our heads at the same time. Sister and Xiao Xun were standing at the head of the bridge. Who knows since when? Sister's eyes were wide, and she was still holding the begonia lantern Xiao Xun had just won for her. Xiao Xun stood beside her, the original gentle smile on his face not yet completely faded, but overshadowed by another, more complicated expression, his brows slowly furrowing. His gaze falling on the posture of me being held by Shi Jilin. That gaze was deep as a pool, carrying a certain gloominess I couldn't classify. His hand moved as if wanting to touch something at his waist, but he forcefully held it back. The carriage travelled through the alley at the hour when the moon was high in the sky, the wheels creaking as they bumped against the cracks of the old stone slabs. Inside the carriage, Sister sat on my right side. Xiaoxun leaned against the window with the curtain half lifted, the light from the lanterns outside sweeping across his face streak by streak. The candles inside the carriage weren't lit between the three of us. There was only the flickering light and shadow filtering in from the window. Xiaoxun's voice suddenly rang out in the darkness, so light it was like he was talking about something trivial. The one just now was young Lord Shi of the Duke of Huguo's estate, right? When he stopped the carriage, he used the excuse that second Miss Gu seems to have sprained her ankle to have my older sister get in the carriage to look after me. And conveniently, he also gave us a ride since it is on the way. Yeah, I didn't explain much, he chuckled. The laugh was extremely short, revealing no real emotion, and then he stopped talking. But I always felt like there was a pair of eyes in the shadows constantly staring at the not yet fully burnt-out magnolia lantern by my hand. What happened that night was treated by everyone as a trivial interlude. Shi Jilin accidentally ran into the second miss of the Guishi family, who was almost crushed by a shelf at the Lantern Festival, and gave her a hand in passing. The gossip convention in the capital city goes like this. If a young lady from a prestigious family and a noble young lord appear alone in the same scene, idle people will always cook up some pink bubbles. But if that lady has always been low-key and well-behaved, and that young lord is a well-known playboy, oh, then there is nothing to cook up. It is probably just that the playboy happened to step in some dog-shit luck while strolling around and played the hero for once. No one took it seriously, except me. The next day I wrote a letter, put it in a plain white envelope, and sealed it with a circle of wax. There were only a few words in the letter: if you are willing to take me as your wife, I will marry you. I had Lu Zhu send it to the Duke of Huguo's mansion, telling her to hand it personally to Shi Jilin's personal servant. When Lu Zhu came back, she told me with a weird look on her face that the servant was so excited when he took the letter he almost ran the wrong way. And even the old gatekeeper couldn't help but yell out, "Kishi, why are you running south? The heir is in the east courtyard." Shi Jilin's reply didn't come. But 3 days later, elder Princess Minghua's carriage stopped at the gate of the Prime Minister's residence. Elder Princess Minghua is the current emperor's biological older sister, so her esteemed status goes without saying. This grand lady is usually very haughty and doesn't easily play matchmaker for anyone. But today she visited in person and praised Shi Jilin up and down for a solid half hour. She went from praising how this kid has a good constitution to his pure and kind nature, and from saying he is the first to pay his respects during the holidays to people outside, say he is a playboy, but actually he just doesn't care much for socializing, talking so much that even my father couldn't quite sit still. Shi Jilin himself followed behind the elder princess, dressed very properly, not in those flashy clothes trimmed with gold thread, but in a plain, dark raven blue Chang'an brocade robe, his hair tied up with a jade crown. Even the fresh shaving nick behind his ear showed that he had specially tidied himself up today. He stood there and dutifully bowed to my father and mother, bending his waist extremely low, and when he stood back up, he secretly sneaked a peek in my direction before quickly dropping his head again. With the elder princess acting as the matchmaker, we have to give her this face. Father and mother exchanged a look, then glanced at the mountain of gift boxes piled up beside Shi Jilin brocade, covers made of Songjiang cloth, enamel-inlaid betrothal boxes, and even the handwriting on the betrothal gift list was personally written by the Hanlin scholar most famous for his small regular script in the capital. Father cleared his throat. Even though they say marriages are decided by parents' orders and matchmakers' words, we still have to ask my daughter what she wants. If she is willing, our Guzi family is naturally happy to form a marriage alliance with the Duke of Defender's estate. When I was called to the main hall, Shi Jilin was so nervous he didn't dare to look at me. His body was completely tense, but he was trying hard to act calm, like a student taking a test who knows the questions ahead of time, but is still scared of messing up. It wasn't until I clearly said the words, "I am willing," to my father that his tense shoulders suddenly relaxed. He lifted his long eyelashes, and the light in those phoenix eyes wasn't wild joy, but a very, very gentle sense of security, like someone who had been walking in the dark for a really long time, and finally saw a light ahead. The elder princess clapped her hands happily, her loud voice almost shaking the teacups off the table. and ordered people to keep carrying the betrothal gifts into the main hall. The marriage certificate was exchanged in no time. Father's mouth twitched when he received the gold-stamped red card from Duke Hugo's mansion, just treating it as a pretty good marriage alliance. Duke Hugo held the military power of the northern borders, which would naturally be a great help to the crown prince in the future. Mother, however, kept her brows slightly furrowed the whole time. It wasn't until the elder princess's carriage was far away that she turned her head and looked me up and down, as if she didn't recognize her own daughter. Waning, how could you agree? Her frowning tone was mostly puzzled, with barely any heartache. I was going to say that I really thought young Lord Shi was great, but before I could finish, Mother waved her hand and cut me off. Why don't you tell me what is so great about him? Is it his cockfighting, dog racing, and fooling around with women? Is it his cricket fighting at the tavern? Or is it that he has never worked a proper job for a single day? She rattled off her scolding like a machine gun, and finally the line using my older sister as a benchmark arrived right on cue. I thought you were smart and sensible, but who knew you'd be so muddled? You can't compare to your sister at all. I looked at her calmly growing up. Whenever she said I couldn't compare to my sister, I never dared to talk back, only hiding in my room, muffling myself under the blanket, and feeling bitter. But now, looking at her furious and exasperated face, I didn't feel a single ripple in my heart. A person's disappointment has a quota. Once it is used up, it is really gone, Mother. I think young Lord Shi is a very good person. What is so good about him? She pressed on unwillingly. What was so good about him? It was good that he wasn't Xiaoxun and wouldn't abandon me for another woman. It was good that he knew exactly what kind of lantern I wanted, the very first time we met. It was good that in this lifetime, he gave me a lantern and I was still in time to accept it, but I couldn't say these words out loud. Father grew a bit impatient listening to this. He put down his teacup and waved his hand. Enough. At the end of the day, the Duke of Hugo's estate is a first-class dukedom. No matter how much Shi Jilin slacks off, he is still the future Duke of Hugo. You've seen the weight of these betrothal gifts too. The other party is treating our whining as a proper wife at the heir, not just casually brushing us off. Besides, the Duke of Hugo holds military power, which will be a huge help to His Highness the Crown Prince in the future. None of this is a bad deal. After hearing him mention the words Crown Prince, Mother miraculously swallowed back everything she was about to say. Her eyes darted around and her anger was gradually suppressed by calculation. She finally waved her hand. Good thing the one your sister is marrying is the Crown Prince. Even if your marriage doesn't turn out well later on, she'll be able to protect you somewhat. No matter how bad the Duke Defender's estate is, they still hold some military power. In the future, if they pledge loyalty to the Crown Prince, your sister will securely hold the position of Empress, and you'll be able to live a stable life. She wasn't looking at me when she said this. She was looking at the grand blueprint for my sister that was always on her mind. I was just a minor character casually scribbled into the column labeled Miscellaneous Affairs on the side of that blueprint. As long as I am useful, there is no need for me to be refined. I gave them a curtsy and quietly exited the main hall. Honestly, I've known for a long time that Mom and Dad might care about me as their daughter too. But that care comes with a condition that will always come first, my sister. My sister is their first child, the eldest daughter who was lively and endearing since childhood, doing them proud. As for me, when I was born, Father sighed and said, "Why isn't it a son?" While Mother, who nearly died from a massive hemorrhage giving birth to me, has always secretly resented me for being born a jinx to her. In their hearts, favoritism isn't a choice. It is a habit. In my previous life, after my elder sister died, my parents never visited the palace gate again. The Empress was still a daughter of the Gu family, but they would rather not see me because seeing me would remind them of their eldest daughter who died deep in the mountains. They hated me for being alive, hated me for securing the position of Empress, and hated me for stealing my elder sister's life and husband. This hatred was enough for me to digest for a lifetime. In this life, I don't plan to digest it anymore. It is not my fault that my family ties are so thin. Choosing a path for myself that I can keep walking on is not a mistake either. The next day, I saw Xiaoxun in the estate's garden. He was sitting on a stone bench by the artificial hill, the pot of tea in front of him already mostly cold. He had clearly been sitting there for a long time. seeing me walk over holding an embroidery hoop. He stood up abruptly, the wind stirred by his feet brushing the loose hair on his forehead. His voice was deep, directly cutting off my motion to bow. "Gu Huining, are you engaged to Xie Jilin? Your Highness is truly well informed." I withdrew my hands from bowing and nodded. He stared intently at me, his jaw clenched dead tight, and suddenly pulled his lips into a cold half-smile. "Did you know that Xie Jilin will achieve great things in the future? So after you couldn't marry me, you chose to marry him?" I frowned. What was that supposed to mean? He knew Xie Jilin would achieve great things in the future because he had also been reborn. Yet he kept quiet about using his past life memories to choose my older sister, and instead felt my choice had ulterior motives. My marrying anyone was a scheme, but him marrying his true sweetheart was true love. "I don't understand what your Highness means," I said flatly. "Nor have I ever thought about marrying your Highness." Xiaoxun sneered, suddenly leaning close and bending over to lower his voice right by my ear. His breath hit my ear, yet it was so cold. "Gu Huining, stop pretending. I know you were reborn too. That day at the flower viewing banquet, you swam ashore from the lake all by yourself. The Gu Huining of our past life didn't know how to swim." He paused, his voice dropping even lower, so low it sounded like it was ground out from between his teeth. "I was the one who taught you how to swim later on. Do you want me to spell out exactly how I taught you?" I took a step back, my back slamming into the sharp edge of the rockery. "Yes, he taught me in our past life. I didn't know how to swim after almost drowning in a lake when I was little. I was always afraid of water. Later, so I wouldn't be pushed into the water as a stand-in like at the flower viewing banquet, and need someone else to fish me out, I steeled myself to learn. Xiaoxun was already my husband, then an ice-cold husband. He held my waist and arms in the pool, correcting my movements bit by bit. The physical distance between us went from stiff and distant at first, slowly turning ambiguous and intimate, until he tore off my clothes and pinned me against the edge of the pool wall in the water. Him bringing those things up now in such a cold, mocking tone feels like taking a knife to slice open an old scar branded deep in my flesh and bones. He scoffed. "Not pretending anymore, Gu Huining. I made my stance clear long ago. From the day I came back, I never planned to have anything to do with you again. I figured since you also have memories of your past life, you'd behave yourself, but you just had to choose Xie Jilin." He leaned in close to me, so close that I could clearly see my tiny reflection in his anger-reddened eyes. He said, "Xie Jilin is going to be my trusted right-hand minister in the future. This time, I absolutely won't let you use him and ruin his marriage." He paused, then added, "I won't marry you in this lifetime, but as my sister-in-law, you'll still enjoy a lifetime of honor and glory. Gu Huining, don't be too greedy. Don't go scheming against Xie Jilin. Understand?" I took a deep breath and stepped back 2 paces to put some distance between us. The sharp points of the rocks jutting out behind me pressed into my spine, keeping me exceptionally clear-headed. "Your Highness, I truly understand your stance. From my rebirth until now, I have always consciously stayed far away from your Highness. But I am not using young Lord Xi, much less settling for the next best thing." I paused, calmly meeting his questioning gaze. Perhaps I was indeed influenced by some memories of my past life. So I know young Lord Xi is not as worthless as he appears on the surface. It is precisely this understanding that drew me to him. I genuinely want to marry him. Xiaoxun froze. He expected me to feel guilty, to lower my head in silence, like in our past life whenever he interrogated me about a mistake in the study, and then obediently correct it, but I didn't. I held my head high. He looked at me, glaring for a long time before squeezing 3 words out of his throat. "What did you say?" "I genuinely want to marry Xie Jilin," I repeated. Word by word, "I won't influence his decisions in assisting your Highness in this life, nor do I want to vie for any presence in front of your Highness. Your Highness, in this life, I sincerely congratulate you on finally achieving your heart's desire. I will absolutely not disturb your Highness and my sister. I also hope your Highness will grant my wish." In this life, Kan Xiaoxun stayed silent for a long time. So long that I thought he couldn't be bothered to say anything else. So long that I looked away from his face and was about to leave, but he suddenly reached out and grabbed my arm. He gripped me really hard. Anyone who had been husband and wife in a past life would understand that this strength wasn't anger. It was panic. like something was really about to slip through his fingers. Guhuining, how could you truly want to marry Shijilin? His voice was a bit tight, his tone kept extremely low, so low that it sounded like he was questioning himself. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he said something that even he probably didn't expect to come out of his mouth in our past life. You obviously loved me so much. You worked tirelessly for me, took care of everything for me, and stayed devoted to me for a whole lifetime. Ah, Xun Huaining, what are you doing? My older sister's voice came from the moon gate. She stood under the pear tree whose blossoms were just about to turn white, holding a handful of freshly picked jasmine flowers. The sweet, fresh scent of the flowers still filled the air around her, but her face had already turned snow white. She stared in shocked bewilderment at Xiaoxun's hand gripping my arm, and in those eyes that usually carried a touch of arrogance, there was now only disbelief. Xiaoxun's fingers let go as if he'd been burned. I took the chance to step back twice, and as I brushed past Jie, I said very softly, "I'll head back first." She didn't stop me, didn't lose her temper at me, just stood there staring at Xiaoxun. I quickened my pace and walked out of the moon gate. What came from behind me wasn't Jie's sharp questioning, but a very long silence. That silence was more nerve-wracking than any crying or screaming. I hurried out of the back garden, the cold sweat on my back soaking a thin layer of my inner clothes. Chunhua was waiting outside the inner gate. Seeing that I didn't look right, she came over wanting to ask something. But I stopped her with a look. I was just about to tell her to have someone prep the carriage when I looked up and saw a figure standing at the manor gate in a raven blue brocade robe, with a tall build cupping his hands in greeting to the old gatekeeper. Why is he here? I didn't make plans with him beforehand. Shijilin saw me walk out from behind the screen wall, and his eyes visibly lit up. Then, as if feeling his expression was too obvious, he forced that joy down, pursing his lips into a slightly comical curve. I didn't want him to see me looking so shaken, so I held onto the doorframe to steady my breathing before walking over. Why are you here? I am here to pick you up to check out the jade shop. He tried his best to make his tone sound incredibly natural, but his ears betrayed him and started turning red. Didn't you say last time that you wanted to get a new pair of white jade cups for drinking tea? I happen to know a pretty good shop, and I wanted to take you to pick them out. He was lying. What I said last time was go pick them out when there is a chance. I never said I want to go today. He probably thought about it over and over before working up the courage to show up at my door, and afraid his excuse wasn't convincing enough, he had rehearsed it in his head several times. The carriage rolled slowly all the way toward the East Market. He sat across from me, knees pressed together, behaving as properly as if he were taking an exam. Only those eyes that kept stealing glances at me and then quickly darting away betrayed him. Entering the jade shop, the shopkeeper saw it was him and immediately hurried over to usher us into the back room. The shopkeeper was a short, chubby, middle-aged man with a round face. The way he bowed and scraped to Shijilin clearly wasn't just politeness to a regular customer, but more like the reverence for his meal ticket. He quickly brought over a sandalwood box and placed it in front of us, said the items you requested, and then retreated with the clerk, shutting the door tightly behind him. Shijilin held the box, placed it in front of me, and opened the lid. Inside the box was a dark red velvet lining, and on top of it was not the white jade cup. It was a thick stack of land deeds and account books. There were deeds for a jade shop in the East Market, 2 fabric shops, a tea house, and a manor outside the city, each stamped with his private seal. The handwriting in the account books was partly his own. The accounts weren't perfectly neat, but every entry was clear. Huaining, I just want to tell you, I am not exactly what the rumors outside make me out to be, incompetent and doing no proper business. He lowered his eyes to look at his tightly clenched knees, the red flush from his ears already spreading to the base of his neck. I've been properly running some of the shops under my name, and I've also built up some wealth over these years. Although it is not a lot, it can guarantee you a comfortable life. Now I am handing all of this over to you. He paused, then hurriedly added, Also, there is one more thing I have to make clear to you. He lifted his head, and those phoenix eyes no longer held the awkwardness and evasiveness from the Lantern Festival earlier, but instead carried a solemn, almost devout seriousness. I have never ever been to those pleasure houses. Those rumors outside are a reputation they specifically fabricated to slander me. I am very clean. From start to finish, I've only ever had you in my heart. You have to believe me." He stumbled over his words, his voice trembling a bit at the end. Looking at his knuckles white from nervousness, I suddenly felt like my chest was filled with wad after wad of soft cotton, stuffed so full that even my heartbeat was muffled and couldn't make a sound. "I believe you," I said softly. He jerked his head up, the tension in his eyes shattering into sparkling light. "But I need to tell you something, and you can't tell anyone." "I'll take it to my grave," he chimed in immediately. I whispered softly in his ear. "You've played the playboy all these years because your father commands over 100,000 elite troops guarding the northern border. You can't be too flashy in Shangjing. You have to hide your edge. The more worthless you act, the more at ease the emperor is with Duke Hugo's estate. The more you seem like useless mud that can't be plastered to a wall, the less the second prince and fifth prince's people will try to win you over and force you to take sides through marriage." His ears turned completely red before I even finished speaking, so red they were almost dripping blood. I pulled back, and he stared at me blankly for several breaths before finding his voice. How did you know?" "I guessed. Right. Whining is so smart, of course you could guess." He nodded in realization then, feeling his tone was too happy. He embarrassedly pressed his lips together, looking at him like this, so happy, so embarrassed, and with his eyes completely full of me, I suddenly found him both ridiculous and cute. I've met a lot of men over my 2 lifetimes. Xiaoxun was cold, stern, and decisive. The princes were always putting on fake smiles, and the court officials were all so serious. But only this guy hid his crush for over a decade, hiding it so well that even I, the person involved, didn't notice a thing. Yet the moment he stands in front of me, he can't even hide his heartbeat. "You still haven't told me," I asked softly. "Why do you like me so much?" His hand holding the teacup shook violently, splashing a few drops out, and then he frantically searched for a handkerchief but couldn't find one. I handed him mine, and he said, "No need, I didn't get burned," then started changing the subject. Who said I really liked you?" I raised an eyebrow. He gave in, clutching the handkerchief in his hand, his voice dropping pitifully. "Fine, I just really like you." Then he suddenly stood up, dug around at the very bottom of the account books, and pulled out a small beaded wooden box. The outside was black lacquer painted with gold, and on the velvet cushion inside lay 2 plain old beaded hair flowers. One was a hibiscus, the other a magnolia. The craftsmanship was rough, and the texture on the petals was already worn out. They were a cheap style that used to be popular at street stalls a long time ago. He picked up the magnolia beaded hair flower, carefully placed it in my palm, and then slowly told me the whole story from start to finish. That was many years ago. That year he went with his father to a banquet at a prince's mansion to congratulate them on the new little princess. At the full moon banquet, to make the little girls who came with their parents from various households happy, the princess consort had a maid bring out a box of pearl hairpins for the girls to pick from. That lady was holding 2 little girls by the hand, an older one wearing a pale yellow skirt with lively eyes, a younger one wearing water green clothes standing quietly. He couldn't tell if the magnolia flowers embroidered on her cuffs were hand-embroidered or printed. The madam dug out the 2 remaining ones from the beaded flower box and held them out in front of the 2 little girls to let the older one pick first. The older one looked left and right, looking at the hibiscus and then at the magnolia, her little hand hovering back and forth over the hibiscus flower, just unable to make up her mind. Right at this moment, the younger one's eyes lit up, looking at that magnolia beaded flower. She let out a soft "ah" and raised her hand, about to take it. The older one immediately snatched that hibiscus beaded flower into her hand, saying she wanted this one. The younger one's raised hand hung in midair, not moving for a long while. Finally, she pulled it back herself, took the remaining magnolia, and didn't cry either, just lowered her head and touched the silk petals of that flower. The madam next to them praised the older one for her good taste, saying the hibiscus made her face look pretty. The younger one went completely unnoticed the whole time. Only he noticed her. He saw the magnolia embroidered on the younger sister's cuff. He also saw her carefully pin that leftover magnolia that everyone else had passed on into the hair by her temple, pursing her lips to reveal a tiny, very faint smile, a happy one, not the forced kind. After that, his eyes would always unconsciously land on that little girl. At the banquet, she quietly followed behind that lively older sister. If her sister told her to pass a handkerchief, she'd pass it. If her sister told her to greet someone, she'd greet them. When her sister got into trouble and was reprimanded by the madam, she would softly say, "Mother, a cat came in from outside and startled sister. It is not sister's fault." When her sister was happy, she would pull her to spin in circles, and she would laugh along. But that sister spun too fast, and she couldn't keep up, falling down onto the grass. Her sister had long run off elsewhere to play, so she got up by herself, patted her skirt, and didn't cry. He watched that little girl grow up little by little. At some banquets, in tea houses and painting shops on the bustling streets, saw her facing elders gently and courteously, saw her bending down on the road to help bullied women and children out of trouble, saw her smiling in front of a flower stall holding a few magnolia branches. That smile was even prettier than the pearl hairpin from when she was little. It sounds absurd. He has only seen her smile face to face twice in his life, and altogether it is not enough to count on 2 hands. But he already couldn't forget Nianian. Later, I had someone quietly ask around about who that little girl in the aqua green dress was. He gently pushed the beaded flower hairpin into my palm. "You were only 7 then. I've remembered you for 11 years. I looked at the extremely crude old beaded flower in my palm, and a place in my heart that had been closed for a long time was gently pried open a crack. In my past life, this flower never existed in my heart. In my past life, I took another path, and he stood in another position, unable even to get close. In this life, he spread out the things he had secretly hidden for so many years right in front of me, counting them out for me to see one by one, as if afraid that missing even one wouldn't be enough to earn my trust, afraid of being seen as just acting on a whim. I lowered my head and gripped that old beaded flower in my palm. Seeing that I didn't respond for a good while, he awkwardly shut his mouth and started unconsciously rubbing the cuff of his left sleeve again. "Shijilin," I suddenly spoke up. He straightened his back a bit, as if his name had been called out. I carefully placed the flower in my palm, loosely cupping it with my fingers, and looked over at him. "Weren't you going to give me the land deed to the jade shop? Take it out, I'll accept it." He froze for a second, then hurriedly rummaged through the box, knocking over several stacks of land deeds and account books. Amidst his clumsy scrambling, I silently curled up the corners of my mouth. This guy is a deep thinker and hides it well, having played the role of a spendthrift playboy in front of the world for years. But in front of me he was so flustered he couldn't even hold an account book steady. We have plenty of days ahead. In this life, I have all the time to slowly watch, slowly count. The royal spring hunt has always been a big deal. The emperor's entourage, along with hundreds of guards, grandly set up camp at the Tayan Mountain hunting grounds. The accompanying families of the officials and generals of the 3rd rank and above pitched their tents on the flat ground of the hunting area. Looking down from halfway up the mountain, the white tents rolled on like clouds. On the 2nd day of the hunt, Xiao Xun led the finely dressed young men from the various estates into the woods to hunt. Princess Pingyang invited us ladies to set up a game of pitch-pot on the lawn for fun. The sun was just right, and a few young noblewomen were happily throwing arrows. Chunhua stood by my side, keeping score for me. I occasionally threw an arrow or two, but mostly just sat there sketching a draft for my Sioux embroidery. 2 hours later, we heard the sound of horse hooves, and shouting from afar the hunting party had returned. The young lords who had set out in fancy robes came back with quite a few pine needles and mud splatters on them, with pheasants and wild hares hanging behind their saddles. All the ladies on our side stood up to pay our respects to the crown prince and the accompanying princes. When Xiao Xun swung down from his horse, there was a light sweat on his forehead. The narrow sleeves of his hunting clothes still had fresh blood on them, probably from personally hunting something big. I habitually pulled a spare handkerchief from my waist, waiting for the people behind to come over and pass it to him. This was an instinct developed in my past life. Having been the empress for half my life, every time he dismounted during a hunt, I'd pass him a handkerchief. He'd take it to wipe his hands, then toss it to an attendant when he was done. We didn't even need to make eye contact, but before I even had the chance to turn around and put the handkerchief away, he was already standing right in front of me. He reached out so naturally, slipped the handkerchief from my hand, unfolded it, and wiped away the bloodstains and bits of pine resin stuck to his fingers. The few female relatives next to me and I all froze at the same time. My older sister was standing just 5 steps away, about to happily go up and greet him, but her steps just froze halfway there on the lawn. Xiaoxun also froze after wiping his fingers. He looked down at the ruined white silk handkerchief in his hand. It was stained with blood and pine resin, making it impossible to return. He stiffened, his voice a bit dry, as he said, "Pardon my offense, second Miss Gu." When he said this, he didn't dare to meet my eyes, much less look at my older sister. I forced a polite smile and casually brushed off the handkerchief incident. No wonder people always say my older sister and I look alike. The sun is so glaring it blinds the eyes. Even His Highness, the Crown Prince, got us mixed up. Your Highness needn't take it to heart. It is just a mere handkerchief. It took my older sister exactly 3 steps from realizing what happened to stomping over in a huff. She brushed past me, snatched the already dirtied handkerchief from Xiaoxun's hand, and threw it straight onto the ground, scoffing. "It is all dirty, no point keeping it. Huayue's handkerchief looks pretty much the same as my sister's, Xun. You should look more carefully next time. But since you dirtied my sister's belonging, your Highness must remember to compensate my sister with a decent gift." After saying that, she looked up and stared at Xiaoxun. Xiaoxun replied with a naturally, his voice as dry as sandpaper. The atmosphere froze in a subtle standoff for a few breaths, until Shi Jilin caught up from behind. He was holding a huge bunch of freshly picked white magnolias in his arms, probably going out of his way to pick them on the magnolia slope over there right after coming out of the hunting woods. A few were still half-open buds with dew clinging to their stems and leaves. The stems were too long, so he tied them into a small bundle using a leather cord taken off his quiver. As he held them, the petals brushed against his chin, catching the sweat from his face right onto the petals. As he walked past, he casually picked up the handkerchief from the ground and handed it to me. I took the handkerchief and handed it to Luzhu, instructing in a flat voice. "It is dirty now. Take it over to the fire and burn it." Luzhu immediately ran to the fire by the roasting spit and tossed the handkerchief in. The white silk curled up at the edges the second the fire caught it, burning into a grey lump that just blew away in the wild wind. Shi Jilin frowned and glanced at the handkerchief that had been dropped on the ground and then burned, then looked at Xiaoxun standing silently nearby. But he didn't say anything, just handed me the bouquet in his hands and smiled. I saw some magnolias blooming perfectly over there, so I picked some to bring back. For you, I gathered that bunch of dewy magnolias into my arms, lowered my head, and took a sniff. Brother Shi sure is in a good mood. The young lord from the Grand Tutor Fu family, who was usually on good terms with Shi Jilin, rode over from behind. With prey still hanging from his saddle, he flicked the whip in his hand and teased, "No wonder you disappeared while we were hunting just now. I thought you got carried off by a tigress, but it turns out you went to pick flowers." Another young master nearby chimed in sourly. Yeah, Brother Shai used to be on call any time at the tavern and cricket arenas. But now, ever since he got a fiancée, he is nowhere to be seen. Last time I saw him, he was actually doing honest work. I almost crashed my horse into a tree, scared the hell out of me. I thought I got the wrong guy. The young masters tossed out teasing remarks one after another, and the atmosphere finally livened up a bit from that weird silence. Shi Jilin let them tease him without getting annoyed, and even raised his chin a bit smugly. "My fiancée is so wonderful, of course I have to work hard to be worthy of her. What do you wifeless guys know?" There was another chorus of wails and TSKs. I smiled and reached out, gesturing for him to lower his head. He obediently ducked down right away so I could reach him. I plucked a broken piece of dead twig off the top of his head, probably caught there when crawling through the bushes at Yulan Slope. I then casually raised my sleeve to wipe off the dirt smudged on his forehead, but he quickly stepped back half a pace, raised his arm, and gave it a rough wipe with his own sleeve, dodging backward as he said, "Don't get your clothes dirty. I'll just wash up when I get back to the tent later." I nod, pull my hand back and place it back on the bouquet. As I turn around, I catch a glimpse of Xiaoxun out of the corner of my eye. He is still standing in the same spot without moving. The handkerchief in his hand is long gone, but his fingers still maintain the pose from when he was holding it just now, slightly bent, resting at his side. He is looking at the hand I pulled back into my sleeve. I pause for a second and ignore it. My sleeve brushed against Shirjalin's bangs. He took half a step back and I pulled my hand back. This scene had nothing to do with Xiaosun, but his eyes didn't look away. After they were summoned to the Emperor's tent to receive their rewards, Jai dragged me toward the most secluded little woods in the hunting grounds without saying a word. It wasn't until we reached a fallen pine trunk that she let go of my hand and with a backhanded fling threw my sleeve back. Gu Huaining, you obviously already have a fiancé, so why do you still covet the crown prince? Always finding chances to hover around and seduce your future brother-in-law. She angrily kept her voice down, a vein on her temple throbbing slightly when she said the word seduce. I took half a step back. Sister, I haven't. I have never coveted His Highness the Crown Prince, and I have never thought about seducing anyone. Please don't make such wild assumptions about your own sister. If you really haven't, why would Xiaosun say you want to use the chance to cling to me and tell me to watch out for you? She snapped back. Why are things always so weird between you and Xiaosun? Just now he even took your handkerchief so naturally to wipe his hands. And I didn't even notice when he dismounted. Do you dare say there is really nothing between you two? She still remembered the words Xiaosun said to her at the flower viewing banquet that day. It wasn't me initiating anything. It was Xiaosun who had marked me as a potential threat right from the start. His defensiveness ever since his rebirth, the frown he couldn't help but show every time he saw me, his reminder to her to watch out for your sister. All this wariness from her lover had long been planted in her heart. The handkerchief was just a fuse. There has never been anything between the Crown Prince and me. I looked into her eyes and told her slowly and clearly, the reason you think the Crown Prince and I are acting weird is very simple. It is because the Crown Prince has been prejudiced against me from the very beginning and has spoken harshly to me. This isn't something I could choose. You also said you are my own older sister. Are you telling me you don't blame the person who took my handkerchief, but instead choose to blame me, your younger sister, who was dragged into this mess by you for no reason? My sister's momentum weakened for a split second. She lowered her head and bit her lower lip, grinding her toe into the dead pine needles over and over. But that expression of disbelief grew deeper. It wasn't that she stopped doubting, but that she was struggling. Xiaosun loves me so much, he asked to marry me right in front of His Majesty, the Emperor and the Empress. He treats me so well, how could I possibly doubt him? But Gu Huaining, her eyes were already a bit red when she looked up, her lips still trembling. But I think about it over and over, and I just can't help but feel maybe it is just because I got Xiaosun. And you can only marry a playboy, so you feel perfectly justified in hating to see me do well. She paused for a second, then spoke the words she had hidden in her heart for a very, very long time. Ever since we were little, you did everything better than me, were more sensible than me, and gave everyone more peace of mind than me. Mother said you came to repay a debt of gratitude, and Father said you are the most reliable person in the Gu family besides the legitimate son. Then what do I count as? Xiaosun is the only thing I have that you haven't snatched away. If you insist on snatching him away, I really will have nothing left. As I listened, I felt a prick in my chest. It wasn't too painful, but it went deep. She was jealous of me. She had been doted on for over a decade, yet she had always been jealous of the younger sister who was forever used as a background prop. This kind of jealousy was ridiculously absurd, but it was also real. So Big Sis actually knows Mom and Dad favored you too, I smiled faintly. A smile so slight that even I couldn't tell if it was sarcastic or bitter. Mom and Dad played favorites, but I never blamed you for it because you didn't choose that. How His Highness the Crown Prince treats you, or what goes on between you two, I've never thought about meddling in. Believe it or not, I don't like Xiaoxin. I am completely willing to marry Shi Jilin, and I am really looking forward to it. My sister finally went quiet, but there was still a final hint of skepticism in her eyes. She didn't buy it completely. She just temporarily couldn't find any harder evidence to argue back. You'd better mean it, she dropped as her final word, turning and walking quickly out of the woods, tossing her voice over her shoulder. You'd better get it straight. Xiaoxun loves me. It has absolutely nothing to do with you. I didn't argue back. She disappeared at the end of the pine woods, and I stood alone in the same spot for a moment, bending down to regather the bouquet of magnolias I had been holding just now. The flowers were squished a bit crooked, so I rearranged the stems one by one. There is no need to fight with her. I fought for most of my life, fought to the death, and never won a single time. A shrill scream came from over at the camp. Assassins. I called a Jer, and was just about to run towards the crowd. But before we could even take a step, we saw a few figures dart out from the bushes at the edge of the woods. 3 masked men in black flanked us from our escape route, their steel blades already drawn. The tall masked man leading them with a short beard locked onto a Jer at first glance. Or rather, locked onto the auspicious dragon and phoenix jade pendant tucked at her waist that Xiaoxun had given her. He angled his blade at a Jer's face. Boss. The jade pendant on her is the mark of the Eastern Palace. She is Crown Prince Xiaoxiong Che. Ajay was so scared her face turned deathly pale. She stumbled back a step, her back hitting a tree trunk, and shook her head desperately. No, it is not. You've got the wrong person. It didn't matter if they got the wrong person anymore. The blades were leveled at us. Ajay and I were grabbed by the arms from both sides and dragged towards the edge of the cliff. On the cliff was an old pine tree split by lightning with most of its roots exposed. Below the overhang was a drop of 20 to 30 jang full of rubble and dead vines. If you fell down there, you wouldn't even be able to recover a whole corpse. When Xiaoxun and Shi Jilin rushed over, this was the scene they saw: the tip of a blade pressed against a Jer's neck, and me pinned down less than 3 steps from the cliff edge by an assassin grabbing my shoulder, kneeling on the crushed stones. The skirt spread over the gravel, flapping wildly in the wind. Shi Jilin almost instinctively wanted to rush forward, catching sight of his right heel already lifting from the corner of my eye. I immediately shook my head at him, extremely slightly and quickly. Can't be impulsive. He was too close to the cliff edge, and any sudden movement might drag all 3 of us down together. Shi Jilin forcefully held his steps back, the muscles all over his body completely tensed and motionless, his knuckles cracking slightly as he clenched his fists. Ashun, I am so scared. Ajay finally couldn't control herself and cried out, sobbing, her shoulders trembling non-stop while being pinned down by the assassin. Xiaoxun raised his hand to halt the attack of all the personal guards behind him, his face livid as he negotiated with the masked man. He restrained the force in every word, staring at the blade that could slice open Ajay's throat at any moment, his eyes deep and cold like a well. But I noticed it. He shot me a glance, very fast. So fast that anyone else would think it was just a natural distraction during the negotiation. But I knew it was a habit we forged from fighting our way out of so many dangerous situations. It was a question, asking if coordination was needed. In our past life, we went through a lot of dangerous situations together. When the 5th prince framed and trapped us in the Nanshan Palace, he only had 2 personal bodyguards on hand. The back door was locked tight, and it was me who, from across a wall, tied crushed stones with strips of cloth and shot them into the inner courtyard to draw over the Imperial Guards on night duty. The time we fell off a cliff during an assassination attempt, I grabbed his wrist, wedged the dagger from my sleeve into a rock crevice, and hung her there for a whole night. The next day, my arm was dislocated, and I popped it back into place myself. Through all those dangerous situations, we built up a set of extremely brief secret signals. I made a gesture. Xiaoxun almost simultaneously nodded slightly. He glanced sideways and said something in a very low voice to Shi Jilin beside him. Shi Jilin's pupils contracted, then he slowly hid the hands resting behind his back under his sleeves. The guard next to him silently slipped a short bow into his hand. It is time. I suddenly shrank to the side, clutching my ankle and screaming. A snake crawled under my skirt. My movements were hugely exaggerated, and I screamed so piercingly and realistically that the tip of the knife pressed against my sister's neck instinctively shifted outward a bit. Everyone's eyes, including those few masked assassins, shifted slightly in unison. Drawn away by my yell, I suddenly lunged forward, grabbed Ajay's waistband and pulled her upper body down and inward, shouting in a sharp, low voice, "Get down!" At the exact same moment, Xiaoxun barked, "Shoot!" Shi Jilin raised his bow with earth-shattering speed. The next moment the bowstring twanged. The masked man holding Ajay hostage took an arrow to the head, the arrow piercing right through his temple into his skull, splashing blood onto Ajay's shoulder. The man didn't even have time to grunt before crashing heavily to the ground. Shejilin threw aside his short bow and crashed straight toward me. Rushing up, he kicked down the assassin beside me who was grabbing me. As the man fell backward, the loose gravel on the ground tumbled rustling down the cliff. Shijilin got a face full of gravel dust but didn't even blink. He yanked me away from the cliff edge, and his voice cracked as he gripped my shoulders tightly. Ning, as Xiaoxun reached Jay's side at almost the exact same time. Holding her, he backed away a couple of steps from the masked man's corpse, where the knife's hilt was still quivering, and covered the back of her shivering head with his hand. He gave us a glance and didn't linger. The few remaining assassins were quickly subdued by Xiaoxun's personal guards and the camp patrol soldiers who rushed over upon hearing the news. The situation where we were just trembling all over at knife point in the blink of an eye turned into nothing but men in black lying all over the ground and a stench of blood dissipating into the air. Xiaoxun picked up a jeer and took big strides toward his tent. RJ buried her face in his clothes, her hands still clutching that jade pendant for dear life, too scared to let go. By the time we got to my tent, Shejilin was still gripping my shoulders and hadn't let go. Only after he asked the royal doctor and made sure I didn't have any blade wounds, and watched with his own eyes as the female medic squatted beside me to apply medicine and bandage me up, did he slowly back away a bit. But once things quieted down, his weirdness started to show. He kept his head down, avoiding my eyes, and just quietly applied medicine to every single scrape on the back of my hand from the gravel, then used small scissors to snip off the dead skin peeling up around the wounds. Once he finished applying the medicine and packing up the messy medical kit, he muttered with his head down, "You had a scare today, get some rest early," and turned right around to leave. The way the hem of his clothes whipped around made it look exactly like he was fleeing in panic. I didn't stop him. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about how Xiaoxun and I were clearly a whole tense distance apart just now. So why did Xiaoxun look at me like he was looking at someone he knew very well? Thinking about why Xiaoxun and I could cooperate so well without needing words, where just throwing a hand gesture or a secret code felt like we'd done it 1,000 times. He was thinking about a lot of things, but there wasn't a single one he dared to open his mouth and ask me right now. A little later, I went to his tent to look for him. Before I even reached the tent entrance, I heard Xiaoxun's voice inside. You must have seen the level of familiarity between me and Gu Huining, as well as the secret codes that only she and I understand. Right, Xiaoxun said. Xiaoxu was silent for a moment before speaking. His voice was completely different from when he spoke to me outside the tent just now. It wasn't nervous, it wasn't aching, it was a very heavy and slow tone. Can I ask your highness a question first? Who exactly is the person your highness likes? Xiaoxun paused for a second. It seemed he didn't expect this question to be thrown right back in his face. He replied coldly, "Naturally, it is Gu Huiye." "Then what does your highness mean by this?" Xiaoxun sneered. I'd heard that harsh coldness in my ear countless times in my past life, and I didn't even need to look at his face to know what expression he was wearing right now. "I want to tell you, Gu Huining isn't as gentle and virtuous as she appears on the surface, and she won't truly like you either, Shijilin. You should know exactly why she chose you. She knows your civil and martial talents are just you hiding your edge, which is why she picked you. You don't need to marry a woman with such impure motives. If you help me in the future, I will promise you everything you want. I will also be a wise ruler." Shijilin didn't reply for quite a while. When he finally spoke, his voice held no anger and no hesitation. It was unnervingly calm. "Your Highness, what kind of person Huining is and how she'll treat me, I'll only listen to her say it herself. Please do not judge my fiancé as you please, Your Highness." He paused. "Also, Your Highness must be joking. I am nothing but an idle heir, and I can't live up to Your Highness's high hopes." Xiaoxun's voice suddenly rose. "Shijilin, do you really like Gu Huining that much?" Shijilin didn't hesitate. "Your Highness the Crown Prince, I really do just like Gu Huining from childhood to adulthood. She is the only person I've ever liked, over all these years, that hasn't changed. And I don't need anyone else to tell me if she is worth it or not. If she wants to marry me, then I'll marry her. If she truly doesn't want to get married, I will still stand by her side. None of this has anything to do with Your Highness. I also hope Your Highness won't interfere in my family affairs without reason." When Xiaoxun lifted the tent flap and came out, He ran right into me. He paused for a second, and there was something really unfamiliar in his eyes, something I'd seen once or twice in my past life in the days after I was brutally killed at the second prince's mansion. Back then, he hated me for being alive and taking his sweetheart's place. Hated me but had no choice but to fight alongside me in this life. He has my sister, but the lingering embers of unwillingness in his eyes haven't completely died out. Guhuining, you really are something else. He threw those words at me with a sneer and walked past me, his boots thudding heavily against the grassy dirt with every step. When I walked into the tent, Xie Jilin was standing with his back to me by the low table at the very back. The short bow he had just thrown on the ground was resting on the table, its string not yet retightened. He seemed like he wanted to reach out and touch the string but stopped himself, and he looked a bit lonely from behind. He rarely showed this kind of expression in front of me. Xie Jilin, I called him. He turned around, saw it was me, and strode over. He held my hand and looked down at the bandaged wound. Why did you come over? Does your hand still hurt? His fingers gently stroked the small bit of exposed skin just outside the gauze on the back of my hand. He was incredibly careful, as if my hand were made of paper. I watched him check my wound and gently put my hand back down, and I let out a soft sigh. I came because I want to tell you that I can't explain to you why His Highness the Crown Prince and I have those secret signals. But some things have nothing to do with feelings. I don't like Xiaoxun. The person I want to marry from the beginning until now has only ever been you. From my past life to this life, it has only ever been these two words. I swallowed the rest of my words back into my heart. In my past life, I was too late to accept your lantern, but in this life I caught it and I don't plan on letting it go. My wedding with Xie Jilin was set for March of the following year. The Duke Defender's estate laid out their betrothal gifts across more than half the street. There were 12 Su embroidery screens alone, and carved camphor wood makeup boxes lined up all the way from the main gate into the main hall. Mother held the gift list and looked it up and down 3 times, finally dropping her previous "a dandy isn't good enough for my daughter" expression, and changed her tune to say that the Duke Defender's estate was actually quite proper and thoughtful. On the day of the grand wedding, Xiaoxun personally delivered generous gifts in his capacity as the Crown Prince. The gift list was stamped with the private seal of the Eastern Palace, and the items took up a full 8 loads. The topmost load was a half-man-tall white jade childbringer, Guanyin, its jade lustrous and its features compassionate. This standard of reward was unprecedented. Even when his own cousin got married, he only sent 6 loads. As the master of ceremonies loudly sang out the gift list to the side, all the guests in the hall couldn't help whispering to each other, discussing whether His Highness the Crown Prince still viewed the second miss of the Guyu family, his former fiancée candidate, in a special light. Only I knew it wasn't. He wasn't looking at me differently. He was pacifying Xie Jilin. He already knew Xie Jilin would be a very powerful, important minister in the future. And he also knew how deep Xie Jilin's obsession with me was. He couldn't stop this marriage. He could only politely give a heavy gift that would make Xie Jilin unable to give him the cold shoulder. This was the instinct he developed after being the emperor for so many years in his previous life. If you want to use someone, you have to give them face first. When Xiaoxun handed the gift list to Xie Jilin, he said in a low voice, "Treat her well." Xie Jilin took the gift list, cupped his hands, and answered, "I will naturally treat her well. There is no need for your highness to worry." His voice was respectful, but his words weren't soft. During the toasts, Xiaoxun raised his cup and looked from afar at me sitting in the wedding hall. I already had my bridal veil on. My sight was full of bright red, so I couldn't see his expression. I only heard the sound of his wine cup landing on the table, extremely light, completely drowned out by the surrounding noise. On the wedding night of the previous life, Xiaoxun and I just looked at each other in silence. After he lifted my veil, he sat by the window looking at the moon, watching until after midnight before going to the study by himself. I sat on the wedding bed for a whole night. The next day, my legs were so numb I couldn't get out of bed. When the palace Momo supported me, she probably thought I was so scared of the Crown Prince that I didn't dare to move. Only Xunhua knew I was waiting for someone who never came. This life is different. Xie Jilin's face flushed even redder than the bridal veil when he lifted it. He was so nervous he didn't know where to put his hands. He poked with the jade Rui scepter 3 times before finally lifting the red veil, bumping into the tassels on my bayou hairpin and almost yanking my hair. Clumsy as hell. I looked up and smiled at him, and he just froze there like an idiot. The jade Rui dropped by his feet, and he kicked it right under the bed himself. There was no awkward silence between us. When he pressed down on me, his whole body was as hot as that hand warmer I had, red from head to toe. It went from him being totally raw, hesitant, and a clumsy mess, to me eventually whispering for mercy, while he asked hoarsely in my ear over and over again, "Does it hurt?" I said it didn't hurt. He said, "Then I'll..." When we went to sleep, he hugged me from behind like a giant heater, his arms wrapped around me, too scared to hold me too tight, but reluctant to let go. His face was buried in the nape of my neck, his breath tickling me as his breathing slowly grew deep and steady. I rolled over in his arms. He didn't wake up, but in his sleep, he subconsciously tightened his arms around me a bit more. The next day, he got up really early, fumbled around to get dressed by himself, and then knelt by the bed holding a bowl of red date and longan soup, waiting for me to wake up. This was the exact scene I saw when I opened my eyes, the dignified heir to the Duke of Hugo. With his hair crown not even put on straight, kneeling on the bedstep holding a bowl of soup, staring at me eagerly. "Wifey, you are awake. Momo said you need to drink this on the 2nd day of marriage to nourish your body. Get up and drink it slowly. I'll hold it for you." I took the bowl from his hands and, while at it, raised my hand to straighten his jade crown that was tilted so much it was about to fall off. He obediently lowered his head to let me fix the crown, and the tips of his ears turned red again. In the 3rd month after the wedding, I received a letter sent by my mother. The letter said that my older sister was about to officially enter the palace as the crown princess, and according to the rules, she had to first learn etiquette from the empress for a period of time. But the learning wasn't going very smoothly. Mother's tone in the letter was anxious, asking if I could find some time to return to the manor and talk to my sister. It was only after I returned to the manor that I found out things were much more serious than what was written in the letter. My older sister had already locked herself in her room, throwing a tantrum for 2 whole days. The cause was that she made a mistake while learning the crown princess etiquette, and was strictly reprimanded by the empress in front of several noble ladies. As the crown princess, you should lead by example. If you don't understand something, learn and ask more, instead of just going through the motions. The empress's wording wasn't heavy, but my sister couldn't handle it. She felt that everyone was deliberately making things difficult for her. She ran to Xiaoxun crying and complaining. Xiaoxun had originally been patient in comforting her, but hearing her repeat the words, "The empress doesn't like me," over and over, he finally got a bit impatient and replied, "Why is it that she can do these things perfectly well, but you just can't do them right?" Sister didn't catch who the she in that sentence was, but she definitely caught that Xiaoxun was comparing her to someone else. Growing up, the thing Guaye couldn't stand the most wasn't getting scolded or punished, it was being shown up. And as for the person showing her up, even though Xiaoxun didn't name names, she instinctively thought of me. I pushed open Sister's door. The room was super dark, the windows shut tight. There were a few plates of completely untouched food on the table. Even the colourful knots on the chopsticks hadn't been undone. Sister was curled up under the covers, her eyes swollen like a couple of peaches. Seeing me come in, she paused for a second, then snorted and turned to face the wall. Mother anxiously nudged my shoulder from outside the door, signalling me to go in, and warned in a hushed voice, "Huining, coax her gently. She is the crown princess now. If the palace sends her back, our Gu family is totally ruined." I went over and sat on the edge of her bed, speaking gently, "Sister, being the crown princess isn't just about keeping the crown prince company, it is a rank, a job. There are some things you can't just skip out on just because you don't like doing them. The empress isn't picking on you with her demands, she just wants you to be up to the task for this position. If you are willing to give it a shot, really listen to the empress's guidance, and put some effort into it, you'll definitely do great, and the empress will see your sincerity too." Sister suddenly rolled over and sat up, snapping right at my face. "What right do you have to lecture me when you married a useless playboy?" Her voice was as shrill as shattered porcelain. and her mouth was almost twisting with anger. The Empress is totally targeting me on purpose. She just can't stand seeing her son treat me well. She won't be satisfied with anything I do. Don't you think the way she acted was just making things difficult for me? You coming here acting hypocritical to comfort me. Aren't you just wanting to laugh at me? Look, I got scolded by the Empress. And when I went crying to Xiaoxun, he even yelled at me. You must be absolutely thrilled inside. Xiaoxun said someone does things better than me. Is that person you? It is you, isn't it? Gu Huining. So you've been showing off in front of him all along, acting like you are better than me at everything. Huh? Are you proud of yourself? My face darkened, and I stood up. When we were little, every time she scolded me so harshly to my face like this, I would silently lower my head and wait for her to calm down, then follow Mother's instructions to just coax her a bit to smooth things over. But in this life, I don't want to smooth things over anymore. Sister, I was just saying a few words sincerely as your younger sister. If you don't want to hear it, I simply won't say it anymore. Why must you twist my intentions so much? Sister was taken aback for a second by my tone, then indignantly gritted her teeth. Too bad the one Xiaoxun likes has always been me. What he likes is my innocence and liveliness, and the one he is going to marry is me too. No matter how well you do, he still won't like you. You will never compare to me. You are right, I said evenly. Xiaoxun likes you, and you are the one he is going to marry. I never thought about fighting you for his affection. I am perfectly happy marrying Shi Jilin, and I don't feel the slightest bit wronged if you insist on convicting me based on your own guesses. That is just because the thorn in your heart has been stuck there for too long. I pull it out for you, and you still bite me. I turned around and walked out. Mother hurried after me and grabbed my sleeve, her voice lowered but her tone unmistakable. Huining, really? Your sister is heartbroken right now. Couldn't you just go along and coax her a bit? What is the point of you saying good things about the Empress here? Nobody's going to give you credit for it, so what is the use? And now you are throwing a tantrum. You two are sisters. You should be on the same side. Now that your sister is sad, you should just stay with her and humor her a bit. I pulled my sleeve out of Mother's grasp in the past. Whenever she said this, I would lower my head and go back to being the sensible little sister. But this time, I didn't. I looked at Mother's eyes, rimmed red with heartache from crying with my sister just now. Those were the eyes Mother used to look at my sister. She had never looked at me like that, not even once. Mother, my husband's family is busy, so it is not convenient for my husband and me to stay long. We'll head back first, on the day of my sister's wedding. I will send a gift to congratulate her. I didn't say another word, turned around and left the room, went to the main hall and told Shi Jilin, who was drinking tea with my father, that we were heading back. Shi Jilin took one look at me, didn't ask a single question, immediately got up, cupped his fists to my father to take his leave, and followed me onto the carriage. When the carriage drove out of the main gate of the Gu residence, I didn't lift the curtain to look back either. I accepted the fact that my family ties are thin a long time ago. In the future, I'll give them all the face they deserve. But as for anything more, I really don't have it to give. When the war in the northern frontier flared up again, the military report Shi Jilin received arrived in the middle of the night. The messenger, holding a half-burnt torch, practically fell off his horseback at the gate of the Duke's estate. The urgent military order, which had 3 pheasant feathers stuck to it, was opened by Shi Jilin in the study, and he closed it after taking just one glance. His father was ambushed and injured in the northern frontier, and the barbarians took the opportunity to invade the south, putting Chishui Pass in a state of emergency. The emperor issued 3 golden medallions in a row, urgently summoning the Duke Defender's estate to deploy troops. I knew this day would come. It was the exact same in my previous life. The Duke Defender was ambushed and injured in the northern frontier, and the rescue troops sent by the imperial court were attacked halfway, suffering heavy casualties. Later, it was Shi Jilin who led 800 personal guards from the capital city, riding 800 miles through the night to reach Chishui Pass, forcefully holding the defense line for 10 whole days until the backup reinforcements arrived. In those 10 days, he took 2 knife wounds to his left ribs and an arrow to his back. When he was carried down from the city tower after the battle, the armor on his body was completely covered in clotted blood. In my past life, by the time I heard this news, it was already at the post-war court assembly for rewarding merits. Sitting beside Xiao Xun as the empress, I listened to Shi Jilin standing there reporting the battle losses and the list of the fallen to the emperor in his usual calm tone. That year, the magnolia sachet at his waist was still there. It just got stained with the wind and sand of the northern frontier and faded. In this life, I stand by his side. From the moment I found out about the military report, I started packing his gear for him. From the heavy black armor to the close-fitting gold thread soft armor. I had Chunhua track down that gold thread soft armor in Jiangnian half a year early. It was made of 1,000-year-old South Sea python skin mixed with golden silkworm silk. Blades couldn't cut it and arrows couldn't pierce it. I smoothed out the armor plates layer by layer on the inside of the folded black armor and stuffed his bag with the best wound medicine and marching pills from the Imperial Medical Department, along with a whole roll of clean white gauze bandages. Not a single thing I prepared for him was brought up by him. It was all from when Chunhua and I took care of him in our past life while he was recovering in bed for nearly half a year, and I secretly memorized where his wounds were every time. I am probably the only person in this world who knows when Shi Jilin should wrap an extra layer of thick bandages around his waist, and when he needs a hot water pouch kept close to soothe his old wounds after marching on a cold, rainy night. The morning Shi Jilin put on his armor, it wasn't even fully light out yet. He stood on the stone steps in front of the main hall, surrounded by his personal guards who were already lined up, a thin layer of frost covering their iron armor. He looked at me, then suddenly reached out his arms and pulled me tightly into his embrace, hugging me so hard my ribs faintly throbbed. He is a military man with strong arms, but this was the only time he ever held me this tight, not out of desire, but as if he mashed all the words he didn't have time to say into this hug. He said in my ear, "I will definitely come back alive." I gently patted his back, my voice steady. "All right, get on your horse." He let go of me and swung onto his horse, the hooves clicking crisply on the bluestone ground. The guards fell into formation and slowly moved out, his back at the very front of the troops gradually becoming a blurry, dark armored ink dot, eventually vanishing at the end of the long street. Behind me, the red lacquered doors of the Duke's estate were still gently swaying in the morning breeze. I didn't dare look back at the doorway. I was afraid that if I looked back, I'd just break into a run to chase after him. On the day Shi Jilin left the capital, Xiao Xun sent someone to deliver a letter to the Duke's estate. The messenger was a trusted eunuch from the Eastern Palace, and his attitude when handing over the letter was almost excessively respectful, saying His Highness had ordered that it must be delivered personally into the hands of the heir's consort. I opened the letter, read a few lines, and then closed it. The letter read, "The war in the northern frontier is critical. If you are willing, I can arrange for you to temporarily stay in the Eastern Palace, so it is easier to look after you." I put the letter back into the envelope exactly as it was and handed it to the messenger, saying in an even tone, "Please tell His Highness the Crown Prince that I am completely fine. Thank His Highness for his concern, but it won't be necessary." After the messenger left, I sat in the study and flipped through that intact returned letter 3 times, still never leaving a single crease on the outside. I know Xiao Xun's temper too well, from being husband and wife in our previous life to being strangers in this life. He just can't shake that bad habit of his. He doesn't really want to look after me. He just can't stand seeing his property slip out of his control. He cannot tolerate Shi Jilin going to the battlefield for him while I am still living peacefully in a corner he knows nothing about. He has to keep everyone important within his line of sight. In our previous life, he didn't send any armor to Shi Jilin in the northern frontier, and even an imperial edict to reward the army arrived 7 days late. Now he is putting on an act for the Duke Hugo's mansion simply because he is afraid of losing this trump card. The only person who truly cares whether Shi Jilin gets hurt or not can only be me. That year, battle reports from the northern frontier came from the front line one after another. At first it was Quishui Pass is besieged, follow-up troops haven't arrived. Then it was the heir led 800 men overnight to reinforce them, using a surprise tactic to beat back the enemy vanguard. And then there was no news for several days. For several nights I would wake up startled in the middle of the night, touch the empty mattress beside me to find that Shi Jilin, that big heater, wasn't there. So I'd throw on some clothes, get out of bed, walk to the desk, and dig out the short note he wrote me before he went to war to read it. There were only 4 lines on that short note. The ink was slanted and a bit scribbled, obviously written in a rush right before he left wife. Wait till I get back to go pick out white jade cups with you. It frosted today. Put on an extra layer. I am leaving, don't worry, I'll be back. I folded the paper up, put it in the innermost layer of my jewelry box, and placed it side by side with that magnolia flower lantern. By the time the news of his victory and his date of return both reached the capital city, it was already in early spring nearly a year later. The first batch of peach blossoms all over the city had bloomed, and the baby in my arms had just learned to crawl on the cloth mat, stopping every few steps to look up and find where I was. Every day, besides managing affairs in the mansion and looking through copies of battle reports, I made time to teach Luju how to carry hot porridge on a tray to send to the military dependents' quarters. That was a sentence tucked at the very end of the battle report Shi Jilin sent back from the northern frontier. Huining, if you have the spare energy, please help take care of the orphans of the fallen soldiers. I promised them, and I cannot break my word. So I added this matter to the monthly purchasing list of the Duke's estate. Xiao Xun once thought that my marrying Shi Jilin was a calculation, that it was to find a steadier tree than the royal family to rely on. He didn't know that my falling in love with Shi Jilin started exactly from these little things, not even worth mentioning, from me helping him write condolence letters to the families of fallen soldiers. From him still remembering to enclose a dried jesung flower from the northern frontier for me when the battle reports were at their most critical. From him never asking, "What can you do for me?" but only asking, "What can I do for you?" On the day Shi Jilin returned to the court after his great victory, the entire capital city was packed with. I stood high up on the city tower with our child and didn't go to the pavilion. I don't like meeting him in front of the officials at official events. Every word has to be filtered through the Max and the Ministry of Rights, and we just don't need that between us. The kid stood on tiptoes, leaning against my leg, his little hands gripping the grey bricks of the battlements to look down, vaguely mumbling, "Daddy, Daddy." He had never seen his daddy last year. When Shi Jilin put on his armour and left the capital, my baby bump wasn't even showing yet. He had only seen his daddy's token that came with the letters, a peace amulet embroidered with a magnolia flower sent back to me from the northern frontier. But this little guy grabbed it and used it as a teething toy, chewing the tassels on the corners, completely bald. Standing high up on the city tower, I watched the troops at the end of the main road gradually get bigger. When they left to fight, their uniform black armour was neat and bright. But coming back, their armour was worn thin, covered in layer upon layer of cuts and sword marks. Several flags were torn, but the biggest and most eye-catching black and gold commander's flag of the Duke of Huguo still stood tall right at the front. God knows how many stray arrows had pierced the flag before it got patched back up. The tiger stripes embroidered in gold thread were crookedly stitched together in some places, but it still fluttered fiercely in the spring breeze. The man under the flag had also become more composed, more steady. He raised his head on horseback and looked toward the city gate tower. From this far away, he couldn't make out my face, and I couldn't count how many new stubbles he had on his chin. But he just knew I was here, just as clearly as when he bowed to me below the city gate in our past life. He hopped off his horse and tossed the reins to a guard nearby. The generals behind him were still forming up the troops, but he had already strode through the gate tunnel and was running up the tower. Still in his armour, his riding boots clanged loudly on the stone steps. He ran up all 18 flights of the tower stairs, panting but still smiling. Behind him, looking over his heaving shoulders, I saw Xiao Sheng, who had chased us from the pavilion. Xiao Xun stood at the bottom of the tower without coming up. Looking up at it, he watched Shi Jilin sprint up the tower, watched him slow down right before taking the last step to straighten his wind-blown chest plate, and then cross the landing in a single stride, running over to pull me into a long-awaited embrace. That was something Xiao Xun could never give me. Strength of someone coming home, running with all their might when they see the lights of their house. Not a calculation, not a compensation. Shi Jilin's left arm was wrapped tightly around my waist, and with his right hand he held our child and lifted him up. The little guy giggled from being lifted, grabbing his dad's filthy cloak and smearing mud all over his face without crying. He settled our son in the crook of his other arm, then turned his head to press his forehead against mine, his dark iron bracer bumping against my shoulder with a faint coolness. "Ninger, I am back," I had once stood on the exact same city tower to welcome another general's triumphant return. That time, Xiao Xun stood by my side. The officials shouted, "Long live," and the tens of thousands of troops below the city chanted, "Long live our emperor." I was the empress, he was the general, and we were separated by the distance of an entire army and the whole world. Back then he reined in his horse in front of the city gates and looked up, only a vertical height of 18 flights of stairs away from me. But he didn't come up. He had never come up those 18 flights. Not until this lifetime, when he came running up. Xiao Xun came looking for me after all. Not long after Shi Jilin returned to the capital, out on the outer corridor of the imperial study in the palace. I had gone into the palace for a matter related to military affairs, and right after I finished and was about to leave, he stopped me in the corridor. His expression was a bit different from the last time he grabbed my arm in the garden of the Gu residence. It wasn't excitement nor anger, it was something slower and heavier than all that. He looked at me for a long time, so long that the palace lanterns in the corridor began to automatically refill with oil. Then, in an almost calm tone, he said to me, "Gehuaining, I regret it." I thought he would explain. Just like in the past life, every time he did something unreasonable, he had a perfectly reasonable justification for it. It was the minister's fault, imperial father's fault, Gu Huaiyu's fault, my fault. But this time he didn't. He just said it again, "I regret it." Only after I married her and brought her back did I realize he paused, his voice dropping so low that only the melting spring snow on the eaves could finish the rest of his sentence for him. He didn't say any more. He was never an inarticulate man. Yet now he couldn't speak. He didn't need to regret. If this word was of any use, I wouldn't have heard him hold my cooling hand in the past life and say, "You've worked hard all these years." I looked at him. He stood there, in the exact same posture as when he turned and walked away on the lake bank the day of the flower viewing banquet, standing perfectly straight. But if you looked closely, his shoulders and back weren't as impeccably straight as before. For a moment, I felt like he had grown old. Not in appearance, but that bit of certainty and stubbornness that drove him to blindly choose my older sister just to make up for the regrets of his past life was slowly leaking out from his bones. It really took him until now to understand just how much his past life self took from me, Xiao Xun. I didn't call him His Majesty the Emperor or Your Highness, nor did I bow to him. You aren't the only one who made a choice in this life. I made my choice too. He looked at my slowly swelling belly. Long before I stood under the corridor talking to him, his eyes, accustomed to observing details, must have already noticed it. He looked down there, his lips trembling, but in the end he didn't spit out a single word. "Your Highness, the Crown Prince," I restrained my voice, so calm that even I felt a bit unfamiliar with myself. "From the very beginning of this life, your subject's wife never thought about taking the path you chose. I am doing very well now, and I am very happy. I told my husband that you would be a wise ruler in the future, and he believed it. Now he fights bloody battles for your future empire. Coming back covered in wounds just to see his wife and child, not to have your Highness step in and disrupt the peace we finally managed to find. Your Highness, the Crown Prince, if you still care about the slightest bit of affection from our past life, I beg you to let us go, and let yourself go too." He took a dejected step back, that hand pointing at my belly, slightly raised, and then put down. It was unknown whether he was saying goodbye to the Gu Huaining of the previous life, or saying goodbye to an invisible thing that took him more than half his life to finally recognize. I turned around and didn't look back. The dripping sound of melting snow under the corridor dripped drop by drop onto the blue brick he stood on behind me. The night of the palace coup came a bit later than I expected, but it finally came after all. The fifth prince gathered his remaining cronies in the Imperial Guards, taking advantage of the Ghost Festival, when the Emperor was gravely ill and the palace defenses were relaxed on the outside, but tight on the inside. They snuck into the palace city through the side gate of the North Garden. Xiao Xun was well prepared. Using Shi Jilin, he brought 8,000 armored soldiers from the northern camp into the city to set an ambush, laying out a pocket formation at the 3 gates in front of Taiji Hall, quietly waiting for the fifth prince to walk right into the trap. The torches that night lit up the palace walls as bright as day. Shi Jilin wore the black armor that I had personally packed at the bottom of his trunk, standing in front of Taiji Hall to command the defenses. I stayed at the Duke's mansion watching over our child, Sitting in the main hall, listening to the hoofbeats drawing closer in the alleys and the scattered shouts of killing coming from the palace city, gently covering my child's ears. Right before dawn, the news finally came back through the main gate. The fifth prince was executed, and the emperor passed away in his bedchamber. Xiao Xun took the throne. The day after the new emperor took the throne, Xie Zhilin took off his armor. He stripped off the black armor and hung it in the dusty armory in the back room of the duke's mansion, sitting side by side with me in the courtyard to watch our child learn to walk. The setting sun traced a very soft outline on his profile, not looking much like the unflinching armored general from a few days ago who stood amidst the cheers of thousands up and down the city tower. He pulled something out from inside his clothes and put it in my palm. It was that magnolia sachet faded by the wind and sand of the northern frontier. The spices inside had dried out ages ago, and I'd replaced them over and over. The knotted silk cord had snapped and been sewn back together too. But the embroidered petals were still there, and even after all these years you could still make out the original stitches. "Ninga," he said, "from now on you don't need to prepare that wound medicine to hide under my soft armor anymore. The war is over." I flipped the sachet over and saw a new line of small characters embroidered on the back. It was his handwriting. All crooked, he must have practiced for a long time, wishing to be with my wife year after year. I clenched the sachet tight in my palm. Before the sky was fully light, I felt the arm around my waist twitch. Then the grip holding me suddenly tightened, like someone who had held their breath underwater all night, finally breaking the surface to gasp for air. I woke up startled, and in my daze I heard him holding back a heavy breath in his chest, his heart pounding so hard it shook my back. "What is wrong?" I rolled over to feel his forehead, my hand coming away covered in cold sweat. In the coolest hour right before dawn, even the front of his sleepwear was completely soaked through. Xie Zhilin didn't answer me immediately. He first whispered, "Ninga," with a breathy voice, then pulled me bit by bit to lean against his chest, holding me so tightly as if I would disappear from the spot the moment he let go. His arms, pressed against my back, were still trembling. "Ninga, I had a dream." His throat was dry, and he paused several times before he could finish his sentence. "A very, very long dream. In the dream, I saw you marry that man. I stood below the city tower looking at you from afar. You were wearing the Empress's ceremonial dress, and a 9-tailed phoenix hairpin standing high up on the tower. I was very close to you, only 18 steps away. But I couldn't go up. I was afraid that even taking one step closer would bring you harm." He took a deep breath and exhaled shakily. "I could only keep Diang stable, fighting battles my whole life to gift you peace year after year. But you couldn't receive anything I sent you. I sent you a white jade cup, but as the Empress you couldn't use items gifted by an outer court minister. I sent you magnolia flowers, but your greenhouse was planted entirely with crabapples. I sent you all the festival gifts that perfectly suited your taste, and you just thought the Duke of Huguo's estate had a good steward." His voice gradually choked up. I felt his Adam's apple bob a few times against my back. "I couldn't even say a single sincere word to you. I didn't dare to. Then you left. The day you left, the death bells in the palace tolled all night. I was already the great general of Jembe, the Duke of Huguo, yet I could still only stand beneath the city tower, standing even farther away than in the dream, unable to even get close to your coffin. By the end, he had almost buried his face in the hair at the nape of my neck. His voice fell, muffled and indistinct, into the hollow of my neck, seeping into my skin little by little with the vibrations of his chest as he spoke. "I am sorry, I shouldn't be saying this. I know it was just a dream. I shouldn't make you worry." He tried to steady his voice, tucking the corner of the blanket in for me with trembling hands. "Go back to sleep. I am fine, it is just—" I interrupted him, reaching back to hold his freezing fingers. I didn't comfort him right away, just quietly held his hand, like a long time ago at the Lantern Festival when he held that magnolia lantern with a corner blown out by the wind and handed it to me. In the darkness I felt his breathing gradually steady, and the warmth in his fingers returning little by little. "That dream," I said softly. "I've had it too, so in this lifetime, I chose you. All right, the story comes to a full close here. The game logic of this story is different from all previous cases. It is not about how a female lead wins, but about how a female lead backs out. Gu Huaining spent half her past life as the Empress, mediating internal and external affairs, balancing the harem, and treating those concubines who looked like her older sister well. Right before she died, Xiaoxun told her, "You've worked hard these years." These few words weren't an apology nor a confession, but a cold invoice for her labor. She understood, so the first thing she did after being reborn was refuse to change clothes. When I was building this narrative system, the core design was comparing the Magnolia Lantern token across 2 lifetimes. In the past life, Shi Jilin stood under the city gate for half his life. Everything he sent her went through the Ministry of Rites, through the eunuchs, through the head momos in the Empress's palace, and by the time it finally reached her hands, it was completely unrecognizable. She only knew that the holiday gifts sent by Duke Huguo's estate every year suited her tastes best, but she didn't know that those gift lists were written out by a man who had spent over a decade figuring out her preferences. The flowers he sent her, she thought with a manager's taste, the magnolia sachet at his waist. She only thought an equally brilliant setup is the mirrored reversal of the falling into water incident. In her past life, she was pushed into the water. Xiaoxun jumped in to save her and mistook her for someone else. The marriage decree was like a chain that tied them together for an entire lifetime. In this life, Xiaoxun comes back reborn, sees her floundering in the water, and just turns around and walks away. That turn is his most honest moment in this life. He can finally be himself, without being forced by duty and saving face to rescue a woman he doesn't want. And Gu Huaining crawls out of the water herself, laughing while coughing up water. She isn't laughing at her own sorry state, she is laughing because she finally got herself out of that dead end. At the end of the story, Xiaoxun stood in the corridor of the Imperial study and said, "I regret it." And Gu Huaining's answer was, "Please let us go and let yourself go too." This wasn't forgiveness. This was a more absolute kind of ending than forgiveness. She didn't hate him. Hate requires emotional investment, and her emotional quota for him was already used up in that heavy snow of her past life. As she turned and walked away, the melting snow from the corridor dripped onto the blue bricks where he stood. That was the sound of spring coming, and also the sound of the last bit of connection between him and her dissolving. And Shi Jilin had that dreaming of everything from his past life, holding her tightly and trembling after waking up. He dreamed that in his past life he stood for a whole lifetime just 18 steps away, yet never had the right to walk up. In this life he finally ran up, from the bottom of the city tower to the top. He ran through 2 lifetimes. I am Maggie Liu. Some people are reborn for revenge, some are reborn to make things right, and some are reborn just so the person who stood below the city tower looking up for half their life can run up this time.